Yeah. Yes. Which is a foreign concept.
Well, good morning, Your Worship, councillors, members of our committee, Te Tātou, and Rural, and Mr Thomas is on his way in, stuck in traffic. So good morning, no mai haramai. Welcome to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting, today the 14th of October 2021. We are live streaming, so to those watching at home and watching from afar, welcome to you this morning. Councillor McPherson, welcome. You are zooming in, and nice to see you. We can see you, and so welcome also to the meeting this morning and to our staff too. Thank you all for making the effort to come in today. I know you did have the opportunity to Zoom, but it's good to see so many of you here this morning. Mobile phones, of course, they're turned off, and we will have some time later. We'll take a break so that we can clear our messages. So thank you very much. We'll have our opening karakia, and that's by Mrs Trumper. Thank you, Mrs Trumper.
Kia he hiri tātou. Tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I... Oh, sorry, I'm going to start that again because I got the wrong line. Tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho. Kia to ai, te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, homi e hui e tā.
Thank you, Mrs Trumper. Thank you. Any apologies, please? Do we have any apologies? Mr Thomas is on his way in, caught in traffic, so he won't be too long. Do we have any apologies? Carl? Thank you. Yes, Your Worship.
Councillor Bentley did informally tell me he may be late to the beginning of this meeting.
Thank you. All right then, thank you. So, we'll just leave that then at this stage. Thank you. I do thank you. Just to note, Mr Eugene Berryman-Kemp, this is your last meeting today, isn't it? So we've had a resignation as a Te Tātou member. What I'd like to do is I'd like to proceed with the meeting, and at the conclusion we would certainly like to say some words to you, obviously of goodwill and etc. And I'm sure you'd like to say a few things to us as well. So if we could do that at the conclusion of our meeting, would that be? Thank you so much. That'd be good. Thank you. Any items of urgent... Oh, sorry, declarations of interest? Carl? No, thank you. Items, any urgent items? Not on the agenda? Carl? Thank you. Right, well, our agenda item number 5, the minutes of our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting on the 9th of September 2021. Could I have a mover and a seconder that they be confirmed as a true and correct record? Could I have a mover? Thank you, Mrs Trumper. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Any corrections to the minutes? No? Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Kia ora. Now we have our first presentation this morning. This is a presentation of a report from the Regional Council. It's the Greater Utahina Catchment Study, and who's presenting that this morning? Good morning. Good morning, Andy. Nice to see you with us. Mr Brewer. Morena. JP, good morning. Oh, Stavros too. A bevy of beauties.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Probably inappropriate to say. Thank you. Good morning.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Thank you for that, and kia ora, councillors and Lady Mayor. I've been asked to come over and give this presentation to the council today from the Regional Council engineers. I'm not involved in the work and haven't been involved in the work other than the reason they've asked me to come across is because the engineering staff or otherwise engaged in other meetings today and couldn't come across, and so Mark Townsend, our engineer, and Chris Ingle, the group manager, have sent their apologies, but they wanted to make sure that the presentation was made and make a couple of points before we see the presentation. I think there's a picture above me and there's one behind you as well. The main points is it's obviously about the Utahina catchment and flood management in that catchment, and considering what may happen to the future around climate change and how we work with the communities to address that. Our council is certainly keen to work with the Lakes Council in this area to make sure that we have a proper response to that over time, but this is very early days. The engineering team, as I mentioned earlier, they've been working on this work, so it's modelling work, technical modelling work, and there are a number of other stages to go from here. So this is, as I say, early stages, and you would be looking at perhaps how do you address stormwater into the future and developments and so on into the future, and the sort of planning requirements around that. And then finally, if you have any questions around this, if they are technical questions, are things that I'm not going to be able to answer, but I can certainly take those back to our staff and get an answer for the council around that.
This is really the start. I mean, you said this is not the end, this is really the start, and to give us an indication, etc.
This is definitely the early stages, yeah. So here's some sort of introductory notes there, and I won't sort of labour any points on those, but the modelling is around about the impact of climate change alone. So that's what may be occurring within the catchment in the future, and there's some maps that are quite graphic around what they've shown there, so we'll see those shortly. There would need to be a planned response over time, as I mentioned earlier. There could be some opportunities also to incorporate water quality improvements as things develop, so that might be how you retain water or how you do developments into the future which have a better impact on water quality. And of course we'd like to work with the District Council. I think there's always some benefit in us working together with the community. This is a bit more context. The modelling the catchment study requires a whole bunch of things, and you can see down the list of things down at the bottom of the slide there, and there's some tick boxes there that show the parts that have already been done, and then there's a whole bunch, or there's 3 other things that need to be done. Even though they're only half of the list, they're pretty important things, like identifying options and assessing flood risk, then assessing those options and then providing recommendations to council. I think one of the key things that you might notice there, though, on the top of the slide, it says the current level of service for the scheme, that's 55 cubic metres per second, so that's a flow, and a freeboard down at Old Taupo Road is not being met. So it doesn't actually meet the level of, the scheme doesn't actually meet the level of service down at Old Taupo Road currently. And then, as you can probably imagine, when I flick over to the next slide, you can see some maps here which show the impact of climate change modelling, and the map on the left-hand side is currently what would happen in a 50-year event. So the orange is what you call a 50-year event, the blue is the 100-year event, which is a pretty big event, and then the red is what we call a 500-year event. So that's really a very massive event. That would be a pretty horrific sort of event on the city. And it's showing that if nothing else changed within the catchment and we just take the normal expectations around climate change, that's how much greater flooding impacts would be. It doesn't tell you anything about depth of flooding. So if we flick on to the next slide, it just tells you the extent of flooding. It's going to get bigger as a result of climate change, and I'm pretty sure that's not a surprise to anybody. And that's with the current built environment, so that's not with any subdivisions or any changes within the catchment which might happen over the next 100 years.
Councillors, can I just ask that if you would like to make notes of questions, we'll take the questions when the presentation's been concluded. Thank you. It just makes it easier to flow through. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So then this, this map here is the existing situation, and it says a 1% AEP, so that's a 100-year event. And the colours on the map show you the depth of water, the model depth of water at various locations. So once you're getting into those darker green and the blue, blue depths, then you're getting into some deeper water. And it just shows you the areas which would be more severely impacted. So then it's worthwhile just sort of keeping in your mind that picture and then flicking over to the 2040 climate change situation. So I wonder if I can just flick back on that, Stavros, so you can just see, if we just go there, that's the current.
You on the next one?
And then go to the next one. And that's, oh, sorry, you went one too many. That's 2040. Then if we go one more, that's 2130. Yeah. So, you know, that's 110
years.
109 years away. Yeah. So it's just showing you the potential modelled impact and the depth of water. And if we go back, you can see quite a lot of blue in that map there. So 110 years ago to go. Not so much blue in that map, and even less blue in that map. So basically what it's saying is the potential for flooding in Utahina catchment, lower catchment, is greater, and the depth of water is going to be greater. And when we talk about those blue colours, that's about 1/2 metre of water, I think, from the scale there. And then that's pretty much the end of the slide presentation. It's something really to be considering looking forward and understanding looking forward. And there's just some summary and next steps there. So I might just leave it there, I think, and hand to Stavros to make some comments.
Madam Chair, and JP will talk a little bit about, in answering the question, so what, I suppose. You know, but I think in terms of making long-term decisions from the local council's perspective, as you are aware, we have objectives and ambitions to build more houses, to accommodate our future growth and so on. And obviously, from our partners from the regional council undertaking this modelling, it does give us a snapshot over the next 100 years that should lead our strategic interventions as to how we can possibly address the emerging effects of the climate change. I think all the maps, and I want to sort of emphasize that, are based, the flooding projections are based on a modeling set of assumptions. And I think we've talked often about how accurate the modeling might be or might not be. The bottom line, though, is that, you know, the scientific approach to contacting future flooding and climate effects, modeling onto any particular area in broad lines is fairly reliable. You might argue about the actual detail of it, but nevertheless, it gives you a good snapshot for the future. And I think that's consistent with the approaches we have presented to this council over a period of time. We say, what do we do about it? And as you know, we do have a stormwater master plan. We have a stormwater master plan for which we are gradually implementing. We're making an application to the government's infrastructure acceleration funding, and of course our stormwater master plan is informed by these modelling assumptions here too. But in broad lines, basically what do we need to do, and I think for you as a governance board need to be aware of, is that if we do nothing, the future flooding risks for the lower reaches of Utahina will continue to increase. However, the approaches we are taking is that we will insist in the planning side that every greenfield land development needs to have an on-site stormwater attenuation plan. We are also taking precautions and reserving public spaces to make sure that for our densification purposes, we use our public reserves as attenuation, as holding ponds for stormwater. And also, as JP reported to you some time ago, through our infrastructure acceleration application, we propose to transfer as much of stormwater as we can away from the at-risk areas through diversification of our stormwater system. Now, again, also an area that emerges very strongly at the moment, and that has got both national policy statement objectives and also it's got local cultural impacts and effects, it's the quality treatment of stormwater. Historically, we did not pay a lot of attention to the quality treatment of stormwater, but in the future, we'll have to increasingly pay more and more attention in treating the quality of stormwater because, as we know, with higher intensity of rainfalls, higher volumes of water, more intensification, the chances of polluting our waterways are also increasing, and therefore we need to manage the water quality to that effect there too. So at the regulatory level, obviously, we need to be cognizant that at some future point in time, we need to start taking steps to specify the flow levels for new housing. So if we know that a particular area may flood at a certain level, the question is that how high we need to build our houses to avoid the future flooding effects. There might be some areas in the future might decide that is no longer feasible to continue to service, and basically we may have to retreat from some areas. But obviously, one of the main things is to identify and preserve and maximize the effectiveness we can use for our open public spaces to store stormwater. And recently, you have agreed to a contract, for example, to improve the capacity of holding water in Linden Park. We'll be working on further areas on Upright Park and Mangakahi Stream and so on. Westbrook is another area we have identified for storage in stormwater for the future. So you need to see that all in the context of we're pursuing growth, we're pursuing housing. We have the modelling that indicate to us what risks we may face of stormwater, and with our, with the regional council. So together with the regional council, we'll have to undertake both engineering and regulatory interventions in the future to mitigate these identified risks. And that's the whole purpose of this exercise. Thank you. JP?
Madam Chair, I suppose just Stavros has covered everything there pretty well, but as you recall, our Infrastructure Acceleration Fund application had three broad areas. The western side, which really looked at about community detention down through the Mangakahi and Utahina stream catchments. So we've been very conscious that this very obviously gives you the implications of just climate change. So while we start looking towards intensification plan changes, we also need to start thinking about flooding plan changes to make sure that we're reducing those risks down through the Utahina. Obviously for these communities, an increasing risk is unacceptable, and that's why we see this as an important baseline for us to start looking at those policy and, more importantly, those engineering interventions to try and reduce that likelihood and severity of flooding in the lower Utahina area. One of those flood risks, and it goes to Stavros's comment about water quality as well. As you head down towards Old Topol Road, there's some industrial areas there that sometimes regularly flood. And obviously that's a source of pollution and contaminants that make their way into the lake as well. So if we can work on this community detention areas, using our green spaces to slow the water or hold back the water, and we're not flooding private property, we're also reducing the risk of contaminants and improving water quality as well. So as I say, this is really important, and we've alluded to it, that we've received this report, and now we need to work really closely with the Regional Council on our responses.
Thank you very much. And we're looking really around Kotu, and we were talking about that Kotu and Ohinemutu as well. Thank you. Just make sure that we talk. Yeah. Thank you. So any questions, please, councillors? Thank you. Your Worship?
Thank you, and thank you for coming, Andy. It's actually nice to see Regional Council with our council, but the other partner that obviously needs to be involved in that original concept of integrated catchment management that we talked about with land use is Te Arawa. And I was at the launch of the Climate Change Action Plan for Te Arawa the other night, and there are some very effective parties there that would love to be part of this. but especially when you see the Utahina and Ohinemutu. So how are we engaging as we develop this plan together with those other parties? Because that's being led by Te Aroha Lakes Trust, Nikki Douglas. So that early involvement, as you said, Andy, it's early. How are we engaging them? And the other one is, are we, or should we, be looking at underground water flows in your modelling?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to take those questions back to our engineers. I'm not even going to attempt to answer them because they will have a response for you.
Your Worship, maybe I can just add to that. We'd had some preliminary discussions with the GMs at Regional Council who were very keen on working jointly on an engagement plan, and obviously part of that would be directly in talking to Te Aroha Lakes Trust and then making sure we're in a position to really make sure the communities who could be affected if no interventions are taken are fully informed and have their opportunity just to make sure they're seeing proposals for change coming through from a plan change perspective.
Thank you, and I don't think you can underestimate, as Your Worship has said, it's early engagement with those communities that's really quite important. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, a couple of questions, gentlemen. So at the start, when Andy was setting the context, he said this is early stages, and I think, Stavros, you talked about future developments will have to have on-site attenuation. So while we're in the early stages, I take it that this thinking is already going to impact on any resource consents that might be in train now or being lodged now. So I see some general nodding there. Andy, you talked about future 100 years from now, but if I'm correct, if my memory serves me correct, the events of April 2017 were a 1 in 200 year event, the ones that led to issues at our landfill and others, Edgecombe, I think, and also the April 2018 that flooded Nongataha and parts of Victoria. So that was a 1 in 100 year event. So when we're talking about in the future, these events are happening now in this decade. Am I correct about that?
I think I'll take that question back, other than to say that this presentation shows that the modelling shows the level of service that we require for the Utahina is not even being met. So it may be the same situation in other catchments. So I'll certainly take that question back.
So that was another question I had, is when you say the level of service is not being met, by whom? Who's responsible for that level of service being met?
Well, it's either council responsibility on the Utahina, and I understand it's something to do with access to parts of the scheme and maintenance issues there. So I think that's probably something I should be taking back to get a little bit more specific for you.
So when you say council, regional councils?
I think it's both councils, because I understand that we work together on the maintenance.
Yep.
It's
excellent.
It's part of the Kaituna Catchment Scheme.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, if I could sort of reinforce respond to a couple of points. You're quite right. The events in 2017 had a cumulative effect of 1 in 200 years. The Nongataha flood in 2018 had an immediate event effect of 1 in 109 years. And I think what the climate change signals is that the statistical probability of these events happening more frequently than once in 100 years is increasing at the moment. And therefore the question is that what are you going to do about it? Second question is that, are we factoring in stormwater attenuation of the existing resource concerns? For example, the plan change 2, it's clearly directed by the Commissioner that any development in plan change 2 area has to ensure on-site attenuation that ensures no more than 80% of the pre-development flows come out of that development. And then what comes out of that development, then you have to manage it in a way that does not accentuate or exacerbate or existing problems down in Lower Utuhina. Just to clarify some parts of my colleague Andy said, in the Lower Utuhina, the Lower Utuhina from State Highway 5 towards the lake is a managed asset by the Regional Council. It's part of the Upper Kaituna catchment. As the presentation indicated, that it's meant to accommodate somewhere in the region of 55 cubic meters per second flows. The climate change indicates over the next 100 years that needs to increase to about 80 cubic meters per second. That's 45% more water coming down there, but at the moment it doesn't meet the 55 cubic meters per second. And then you ask the engineering question, how can it be improved? And that's part and parcel of our stormwater management planning, asking these questions to say, what are the engineering challenges, what are the constraints, what are the mitigation factors, and what is the combined effect of all these regulatory engineering and constraint approaches we can take to protect for the future. So all these are parcel of our thinking at the moment.
And just supplementary, if I may, Madam Chair. So, Stavros, those considerations, have they been factored into our 30-year infrastructure strategy?
Yes, sir. From our perspective, our infrastructure strategy, when it looks forward to say what do we need to do to accommodate our spatial plan objectives, it factors in the climate change, it factors in the constraints of the existing system. And that's what we said earlier. This is a big ticket item. We're talking about for the next few years, at least $150 million of investment in stormwater alone that's required.
Just adding to that, and it probably goes to the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund. We've told you previously that all the application focused on was the 30-year horizon of what we would have spent in infrastructure investment and stormwater, brought forward to address within the next 7 years, which is critical when you start seeing the frequency of these events going forward and our need to put in place our plan changes to enable housing intensification. All quite short time horizons, so that government investment potential is critical to us being able to manage the risks that already exist, but also to start responding to our housing needs.
Thank you. Mr. Berriman-Kemp?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentations. I've one comment and two questions. Just to talk about what the Mayor outlined, iwi engagement will be critical. Just a reminder, based on those maps that you've got there, I'm thinking it's Ngāti Kia, Ngāti Tuara, Ngāti Whakaue and Te Roro Tarangi, who are the three key iwi. Certainly I know our whānau homestead is smack bang in the middle of that, and it wouldn't handle 0.3 metre raise. So those three iwi, along with Te Rotorua Lakes Trust and Te Rotorua overall, I would recommend. But look, my question really is, I'm interested in this. What's the current status of the dredging at the mouth of the Utuhina in Duapeka Bay? Because I guess I'm interested in how effective is the system in channeling the water out, because my understanding is we have issues with sediment build up there. And the second component of that question is, given the approach to treating stormwater in East Side is also to put it into the lake, what's the capacity for the actual lake system to absorb those flows when you're going to have it not just in this catchment but on all sides of the lake?
Would that be more for you, Stavros, rather than...
Thank you, Eugene. No, I think probably it's an appropriate sort of question for the Bay of Plenty Regional Council's water modelling catchment. But as you know, the Lake Rotorua contains at this point in time somewhere in the region of 800 million cubic meters of water. And the Regional Council has a concerns to manage that level of Lake Rotorua plus or minus with the 300 millimeters. So I think the first question is that what is the dredging impact on the Lower Utuhina? And the reality is that at the moment the Lower Utuhina does not meet a level of service for 1% AEP. That doesn't meet the 1 in 100 year stage. So that means it's got a less than 55 cubic meters per second capacity. I don't believe personally that dredging is an issue. I think it's just the matter of rate of concentration and the channel capacity of the Utuhina stream itself. But nevertheless, the regional council's modelling is asking all these questions. If, for example, we're able to lower the Lake Rotorua level by, let's say, 300 millimeters, what does it mean? In rough terms, that accommodates about 1.2 million cubic meters of water level fluctuation, which may enable that to take place. But then the regional council has to ask, what is the effect downstream on the lower Kaituina? So all these parts and parcels are it's a tricky modelling exercise. And as you said, Eugene, on the east side too, we also going to have the development of the above Linmore in Ngatifakawi lands, and so on. And again, as explained to this council, that we're dedicating our CIP funding to create attenuation on Morris Streets below the Ngatifakawi lands in order to make sure that the actual flow of water from the upper parts of the eastern side development to the lake is managed in a way that is not exacerbate the problem. The whole idea of attenuation is to hold in sufficient water for sufficient time and trickle it down through conveyance to the lake in a way that will not impact onto additional flooding levels. But we need to improve significantly the water quality treatment through wetlands, through sedimentation removal, and so on.
I think probably we can also clarify how this fits in, as Stavros says, with lake level management and stormwater discharges from other parts of the city. So I'll take that question back.
Councillor Yates and then Councillor Kaifong.
Morena koutou, o te rā through you, Madam Chair. With the recent weekend event down at Cuero Park with the geothermal activity, water quality obviously was compromised during that through the stormwater. With the intensified geothermal activity that we have been encountering around our city for many years now, I certainly appreciate looking at a flooding plan, given that Witika Road is our papakainga, Ohinemutu is our papakainga, Koutu is our papakainga. What level of geothermal activity have you factored into this flood plan, especially with regards to stormwater?
I was just making sure I had the question there, but noted down because I'll forget it later for sure. But I don't have an answer for that at the moment, but we can certainly come back and give you a response on that.
Thank you. I appreciate, Andy, that we put you in a bit of a difficult predicament this morning. And of course, our meetings are set, as you know, months out. So it's unfortunate that we couldn't have the engineers here, but nevertheless, we're appreciative that you're here and you can take back these questions, because we'll always make time to have you back on the agenda at any time in the future, your team from the Regional Council. So, but it's good that you're getting these questions. Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given that modelling is based on climate change and we haven't factored in intensification into that, is the use of green space for managing the discharge of the stormwater the preferred option in terms of both cost and damage control, or are there other mitigations that we haven't really considered yet?
I think that what you see there is a snapshot simply based on the current situation, factoring in the modelling effects of climate change. Now, I think it's important to reassure you as a Board of Governance here, and when we talk about our own stormwater management plan, our master plan, we take into consideration key assumptions about densification, about increasing development, about the level of local storage and downstream flow effects. I think there are from time to time, for example, some debates about whether we should insist on greenfield development to ensure on-site attenuation. And the reality, we have no other cost-effective way on doing that other than having bulk storage in greenfield area. In the intensification areas, that becomes more problematic because it's very difficult on a small section, let's say 600 square meters, to create attenuation storage in there, and therefore we're dedicating public space like Linden Park, Westbrook, and other areas for that purpose, because that's why we call it community storage plan. One of the problems you have in Rotorua, and probably most of you are aware of it, the Rotorua Lakes levels where it is today is not what we used to be a couple of 100,000 years ago. So therefore, although now we're sitting on dry lands, our water tables are quite high, and therefore what we call ground soakage drilled down into the ground is ineffective, because basically we're putting water into the ground that can only penetrate maybe a meter and a half below the surface. So therefore most of our approaches has to be on surface stormwater management, holding it sufficient time in sufficient quantity and releasing it like you're managing general traffic into destination in a way that will not create congestion downstream.
Thank you. So I can take that as a yes, that green space attenuation is the best option that we currently have available, because I think that I'll have some further questions in a different part of the agenda, but I think if that's your confirmation, then...
From engineering perspective, Councillor Kaifong, yes.
Councillor, just to add to that, where other territorial authorities don't have the luxury of their green corridors to potentially use the public space, then, as Stavros said, there's limited amounts of attenuation you can do on existing properties, and particularly when you're doing infill. So you suddenly start saying, well, where's the land then? And so that drives a number of other territorial local authorities to purchase and retire private property. So you end up having to take a situation where you need to acquire land to create that sort of public attenuation or detention areas. So we have reserve corridors back up through both the Mangahaki and Utahina, which provide us the cost-effective solution.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and my apologies for lateness as well. Thank you for this report, and lovely to see you again, Andy. Haven't seen you for a while. Hey, and my question is just really to add on to the question you're taking back to the engineers about lake level management for Rotorua, and I think once we look at managing the level of Rotorua, we need to look at the impacts and issues that arise for Ohau Channel, Lake Rotoiti and the Kaituna around lake levels and water quality. I know that the Ohau Channel is a limiting factor for controlling rapid level increase or decrease on Lake Rotorua. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tapsell, then Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. And thank you very much for the presentation on this analysis. I'm very pleased to hear that the Council Infrastructure Strategy and Stormwater study and plans that we have as well are already anticipating some solutions for this. But the question that I have is actually around, I heard you use the word retreat. Now that is a word that I hope we never have to tell our community to do. So when we're looking at the significant communities there around the Utahina River, my question is, what are those solutions that we're looking at in terms of diversification of our system? And you mentioned that, Stavros, when you said there's you propose to transfer as much stormwater as possible away from areas through diversification of our system. And I just asked this question now so that it's clear for all of those existing houses who won't have the means or capability to increase their home. There will be a significant cost on them as well if they're then also having to put in their own stormwater ponds or ways to manage that on their section. So what do you mean by diversifying our system for that? Because obviously for us, the increasing risk for our community is unacceptable. So we want to ensure that we get in as soon as possible with these solutions.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. As I said earlier, the response to our future challenges, especially over a 100-year horizon, it cannot be just a one-dimensional. It's got to be a combination of engineering interventions, planning interventions, and obviously reconfiguration of existing systems as we have. A diversion, what we've said earlier, is that if you recall when JP presented the nature of our infrastructure acceleration fund application for stormwater, I haven't got it with us here, obviously, but in the central zone of the district, a lot of the stormwater at the moment flows towards Yutihina. When we calculated an alternative method, we asked the question, if we capture that water and diversify it to the east instead of the west, that would be a significant contribution towards minimizing the risk you see in that area in the square, in the map in front of you there, because you're taking a lot of water out of an area that is at risk into an area that is more able to accommodate it. By actually continuing to develop our public spaces or public stormwater attenuation ponds, Linden Park, Wrights Park, Westbrook, in all these areas, it actually gives another opportunity for that event there to be pushed way further into the future beyond 100 years' time. And obviously, at the same time, too, what we call water-sensitive land development in terms of creating appropriate gutters, minimizing impermeable surfaces and so on, is our planning intervention. Again, makes a contribution to that too. So it's not one; it's a multi-dimensional approach, but we really basically try to diversify the risk away from a known high vulnerability areas.
Thank you. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation, and I agree with the Mayor and actually Te Arawa, thanking Te Arawa, the Te Arawa Climate Change Strategy as well, that we both attended for their launch. Their focus is very much based on restoration as well, which I think is absolutely important. In our climate change action plan, the trends or the future trends that we're kind of anticipating by 2090 is that extreme rainfall events will increase frequency by 25%. And I know that our coastal communities, and a similar question to Councillor Tapsell's question, our coastal communities have a strategy of retreat. And with the anticipated effects from climate change and the increase in those severe weather events, what planning, I know, specifically this is for the Utahina catchment, what planning has gone into how our lakes and our other lakes and rivers will deal with these issues in preparation for the future, because I as well hope that our families and our homes will not ever need to hear that word. However, we do need to plan for it if that is the case. And so, if maybe that's a question to take back, but just to bring it up onto the table.
Probably a comment I'd make there, Councillor, is sort of like to highlight this stuff here. The people that do this modelling work here sit in a room with computers and a lot of numbers, and they just crunch through, and it's just a science project. They say, what would happen if we get this climate change scenario in 2040? What happens if we get this climate change scenario in 2130? They're not looking at any options at that stage. They're not looking at where water might go or where you might divert water. That's the next stage. And I think both councils are very keen to go, well, we need to show this to our community and for them to understand the potential, because it is only a potential, and then work through with them as to, well, what would be the options? There might be an option of holding water back at some point. There might be an option of storing water or diverting water to different places. And then there's questions around that have already been raised about whether people retreat from areas that might flood. So this gives no guidance or any decisions on any of that. It's just saying this is a possibility and we need to start thinking about the options. So I think I made the point earlier at the beginning, there's a long way to go in this here. And I would imagine that it will be a bunch of phases. So it won't be, we've found the solution here. It'll be in new developments, as Stavros is saying, people will be having to think, well, how do I address this in this new development so it can happen? And in existing infrastructure and in existing parts of the city, there'll be other questions about how do we deal with this going forward. So I think that probably answers your question, but it's certainly something we'll highlight and take back to our engineers.
And probably the only thing I would add is when you start looking, and probably the coastal environment is where we're seeing the clearest policy responses. So now we're seeing the potential implications in an urban area and inland around a lake. So if you imagine what they're doing in coastal environments, you often get changes in floor level heights. So you accept the flooding risk and the expectations about depth of water. So in a number of areas you see policy changes to lift the required floor heights in areas of potential flooding risk. Again, there's a limit to what you can do there. The next step, and again this is change over time, is to prevent further development occurring in some of those areas so they become no builds for the future. So floor levels higher and no builds, and then ultimately the last action, and particularly you see that when you can't mitigate things and the coastal environment is the classic managed retreat.
Thank you, and I hope as our climate action plan is a fluid document that as we further progress onto this and as we work in a partnership that these aspects are included as well, so that we can adapt to the effects of climate change and work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. Councillor Kumar?
Good morning, Kira Tato. My apologies this morning for my lateness. Good morning, Andy, Stavros and JP. Andy, my question relates to something that's going to happen further into our agenda today. So I think some of the things that I wanted to talk about was the dredging of the streams, which has been asked, the responsibilities as to where it lie, because in 100 years' time, when there is a flooding, we'll be long gone. But the community will probably be thankful for what was planned today, so it doesn't happen. However, in 2018, we did see that there was some flooding and there was an excess rain, so probably one in a 50-year rain or 100-year. That was in April. So looking at this modelling, and this modelling is suggesting something for 1 in 200 years, if it does happen, and it covers a very vast industrial area as well, and what the discharge could be from the industrial areas into the lakes as well, not just intensification. However, when that rain came in 2018, the Springfield Golf Course held a lot of water for maybe 2 to 3 days, and we've never seen anything like that, as did Quira Park as well. So while that took about 3 days to subside, they at that stage, without intensification, held well. How does that model fit into what we're doing going forward? Because say, for example, the reason I ask this is, say, for example, if we do end up having Springfield as JP has alluded, that there has been some funds requested from the Housing Acceleration Fund to see, because if all else fails and that becomes then, so do we continue to...
Point of order, Madam Chair. Relevance to modelling suggestion, and I think that's an issue that needs to be raised at a later.
No, I'm going to allow this question. I'm going to allow, thank you. I understand, but I want to hear, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with no disrespect to anybody and no violation, the reason I ask is that because we are looking at a sports precinct coming there. If we are going to continue, and if this stormwater discharge takes precedence above everything else, then isn't it going to be futile for us to expand in that area? Or do we have to wait for this report to come out before we do a go-ahead on anything else?
Councillor, thank you for that question, and certainly we'll take that back. The point just to make on this modelling, though, is it's just with existing infrastructure, so it has had no regard for any future developments. And I would expect the answer to that would be, if there's a development plan for there, then there may need to be some further modelling to understand what impact that has within the Utina catchment. But I'll certainly take that question back.
But just very briefly, Councillor Kumar, I think that 2018, the average events return period was, 1 in 110 years. That was an Ongodaha flooding, event. You are quite correct that when we have streams, it is important to do everything we can to maintain through clearance and removing obstructions and so on the capacity of these streams. And that's a very good lesson to learn from Onongodaha. If you look into that map in front of you there, it's on the screen at the moment, and you can just roughly see where the international stadium is. You see some green areas, some blue areas. The green areas with that projection at the moment indicate a maximum flooding of up to 300 millimeters. In that area, the blue areas up to 500 millimeters. What we're suggesting at the moment, our engineering master plan, in identifying this sort of what we call public attenuation ponds areas, and we have not done a full what we call fatal flow investigation into that. It intends to hold water in specified areas that will allow the intended function of neighbouring properties, whether it's residential, sports and recreation, or whatever the commercial area, with a minimum possible effects. And that's the whole point of having a stormwater management plan. You anticipate the climate, change effects. You anticipate the flows. You ask the question: where is the best position to hold those effects without affecting neighbouring properties? And I think we need to go through that process, because I'm saying if, because these are decisions have not been made by the council yet. If that precinct is going to be turned into some kind of sporting precinct, then obviously the infrastructure that supports that has to be cognizant of and responsive to what we know in this model. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bassini Tuli.
Yeah, morena tātou, kia ora, Madam Chair.
Morena.
Kia ora, whānau. As a kid, I used to swim from Hunt's Farm, float all the way down to the mouth of the Utahina. And I haven't done it for like 15 years or something. But even back then, it was treacherous. It was blocked, it was polluted, there were cars, bikes, trees, stumps. So I'm not quite, maybe I have to go back down in summer and float back down. But I'm pretty sure it's not a clean stream. And so when I heard earlier, whose responsibility is it? My question is, whose responsibility is it? It was already asked. And has anyone been down there with a GoPro just to show us that kind of, where are all the blockages, where are those points, those houses that do get flooded on the turns as the water goes up, especially around by Mātātua Marae, coming up by Old Taupo Road. But my question is around data. And this project needs collaboration and cooperation. And to have an open data sharing system so that the models, the algorithms, the assumptions can be shared with Te Aroa, that would be really handy for us. So what type of models do you use? What computer software are you on? That's a key question, sorry.
Oh, thank you for that. Yes, well, I think that would be the intention, but I would certainly take those sentiments back. And in terms of the maintenance of the stream and keeping the flow clear, I think there has been quite an increase in management of that over the past couple of years by the Regional Council, and we have staff engaged to do that. But there will always be trees and so on that will fall in the stream, and as soon as we're notified about that, there's some management that can take place, and we'd certainly encourage people not to be dumping other stuff in there, which I think has happened in the past. So I appreciate your sentiments.
Thank you. There are some really great volunteers who attempt to make sure that the streams are kept clean, and you should see the rubbish that other people decide that they can throw in there. It's quite sad to see. But Councillor McPherson, thank you.
Chair, through you, good morning everybody. Interesting presentations. Thank you, gentlemen. One thing that intrigues me, time spent down in the Rotary Street area where the many industrial people there have suffered badly from flood flows coming not just through their businesses, but often taking away aspects of their garbage and so on down the stream into the lake. And on a couple of occasions I've asked, what extent is it possible that the regional council can take a much more active role in adjusting the volume, the capacity of the stream itself to carry discharge, carry water, and it seems that all of the other factors are being sort of held constant except for climate change. We're suddenly getting, as it's been pointed out, dramatically different numbers are being used to predict the demand on this entire discharge system. When you get down to the bottom of the Utahina, you find continuing limited capacity for discharge into the lake. The need for a radical new look at the way in which the lake could, the entrance into the lake could be deepened and broadened to carry much larger volumes. So it's a question that goes directly to the nature of the capacity and the capacity of the modelling that's being used at the river mouth itself. Thank you.
Did you hear that? I was struggling a wee bit, but I'm sure you could pick it up. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, I did hear most of that. It was reasonably okay. Thank you. Yes, Councillor. I think at this stage, though, the presentation that's been made is, again, just to iterate, it's just the modelling of the current situation. And again, the capacity of the stream in the lower reaches and the outlet are all things that will potentially go in the mix of how do we resolve, first of all, the level of service that we currently are not meeting, and how do we resolve the need for increased capacity or the increased flow that is predicted to come down over the next 110 years. So that's something that I'll just take back, and I'm sure our engineers and the District Council engineers will be considering those matters as well.
Thank you.
A supplementary, if I might.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you very much, Chair. The related question, of course, is how excuse me, how do the two councils do their modelling and model up the distribution of costs involved? How is budgeting done with relation to the various aspects and dimensions and factors involved? I ask this because it's commonly supposed that the area of the stream from the Taupo Road down is more or less the responsibility, costs and so on attributed to regional council, whereas that above are attributed to the district council. That may be an urban myth, and I wonder if somebody could clarify that for me. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, Councillor McPherson, in broad level, has got some level of responsibility demarcation, correct? The Regional Council has designated the lower Utahina stream from State Highway 5 to the lake as an asset, as a managed asset that is required to meet a capacity level for a storm, a current storm of 1 in 100 years. as my colleague Andy said, that that channel does not meet that level of of service at this point in time. And of course, with climate change increasing the demand of that for another 45%, that will make it even more challenging to meet in the future. So responsibility, financial responsibility for that rests with the regional council to improve that channel. The question is that, is it feasible, to be improving the channel? And we do hear questions about deepening the channel. But from an engineering perspective, as I said earlier, you have a lake that carries 800 million tons of water in there. So even if you lower the channel by a couple of meters, will the water be able to be discharging to the lake? And that's the engineering challenge that remains to be addressed. From State Highway 5 all the way up to the Hunts Farm, it's not a managed asset by the Regional Council. Nevertheless, the water quality and the water capacity of that channel remains with the Regional Council. And that's why they specify limits in our resource consents. They say when you have a land development and you have to discharge stormwater into that part of the catchment, you have to ensure you manage stormwater discharges in a way that does not increase the flow into that piece of channel. And that's why our collaboration starts, to make sure that their available capacity and our future demand are not in conflict with each other.
Okay, can I have one more question then, one more supplementary, through you, Chair, and that is part of the analysis that I've read to do with catchments and their capacities in the light of these 100-year events is the proposal that it might be necessary to contour, that was the word used, some contouring might be needed to enhance the capacity of, for example, Springfield Golf Club's areas to carry water capacity. Now, it's probably an engineering calculation involved, but I wondered what part needs to be played by additional contouring. So I'm looking for a definition of contouring, and then secondly, knowing the ground as I do, because whenever I play golf on the golf course, I cover the golf course in a comprehensive way, you'll understand. I know the ground quite well, and I wondered what role contouring plays in the modelling that's currently being used. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you answer, Andy, it'll just be in response to the question of the definition of contouring, and we'll leave it at that for Councillor McPherson this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's a question I'll take back, Councillor, as I think it's something the engineers can address in terms of what contouring may mean.
Thank you. And the final question, Your Worship.
Yes, just
comment.
Just a question with the result of what we're going to see as politicians once our modelling and regional councils comes together. Will we see and understand an integrated catchment management plan?
Your Worship, if we don't achieve that, we have failed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was the issue with Nongataha floods. And I think Councillor McPherson's quite right when he said we argued about who's responsible for the upper reaches and who's responsible for the lower parts below the state highway. So if we can overcome that with this together, that's a wonderful aspiration for our community.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Andy, for coming and being with us this morning. And I know you're going to take away quite a number of questions. But councillors, obviously the climate change is challenging. It's not only challenging for us, but for all councils around the country. And at least with this presentation today and with this study, we can get that conversation underway with ourselves, of course, and also with our communities too. So thank you very much for the presentation. Kia ora. Thank you. Now, the next agenda item, councillors, the next agenda item, which was the working draft, the Rotorua Housing and Business Development Capacity Assessment. This was for our information. Now, I have been advised, the Chief Executive has advised me that this assessment or this item has been withdrawn from our agenda today. And under Standing Orders 9.9, I'm accepting that, and so that item will be withdrawn from our agenda today. I don't think there's any further explanation required. Thank you. So out of necessity, that's been withdrawn. So we move now to our next agenda item, which is item 7.2, which is the Westbrook Sport and Recreation Precinct. So may I ask for a mover and a seconder, please, that this report be received? Mr. Thomas, thank you. Councillor Kai Fong, seconder, thank you. So I'll put that motion that the report Westbrook Sports and Recreation Precinct be received. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. So this morning presenting is Rob. Perfect. Bekethly, thank you. Always get it tongue-tied. Bekethly, thank you. And JP sitting there to Morena, Rob, thank you.
Morena koutou, Council, and thank you for the opportunity to come back before you with this. To set firstly the context, the Westbrook feasibility precinct, or the feasibility for the Westbrook precinct was brought to the council back before the last LTP in the workshops in late 2019. In more recent discussions with this committee, the question has come back saying, can you please update us on what is happening and what is the situation? And so we've gone through preparing a presentation today which follows the format of the report, which basically comes to you as a result of that request for more information to take you through, refreshing you on how the precinct idea came about, the current information that we have collected, because that was nearly 2 years ago that the feasibility came to you in an LTP workshop, and additional important considerations such as what you've just heard, which have certainly arisen since this whole feasibility idea came forward. So there's been some pretty important impacts on the council over this period. We are in a very different time than we were back in 2019, and so we need to understand the implications on this significant open space and a strategic open space area in the city. It's become very clear in the last few years since the feasibility report was done that there's a much bigger picture to address with this piece of
Thank you, Rob. Can I just also, sorry for interrupting, but I do want to remind councillors, and you've just alluded to it, that this report today is a response to the request that councillors put asking for more information, and so it's significant, but it is in response, councillors, to our request for the information to be presented and as soon as possible. So thank you for reminding us about that, Rob. Kia ora.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we'll start with this slide here, which actually is part of the basis for the whole origination of the feasibility of the questions around what might happen. This is an image of our sports field network. We've got a variety of parks that are used for sports fields. Some are used intensively and some are used very randomly. But basically, surveys of residents over the last decade, when we were asking specific questions around sports field, the feedback we've been getting is the sports fields in Rotorua are not in good condition. We get 30% satisfaction from our community when we were asking sports field specific questions. Clubs and codes are frequently reinforcing this information. Sorry, Rotorua, you haven't got good sports fields. We know that we're currently closing our sports fields at about 3 to 5 times the frequency of our other Bay of Plenty territorial authorities. So, and a lot of the reason for this is that the history of the way that the sports fields have been set out is that they're often in areas that aren't suitable for much else. We've got areas very low lying, so we've got poor drainage. We've got sports fields which are on swamps. We've got sports fields which are on old waste management sites, and we've got sports fields in highly sulphurous areas. So To support sport in Rotorua, we need to do something about our sports fields. This was recognised in our Spaces and Places strategy in 2018, and people, as perhaps Stavros might have said, so what, or why do we bother? Sport and active recreation has significant impacts on individual and community wellbeing. All around the world it's been studied. Sport New Zealand have studied it here in New Zealand. Organised sports lead to happier, healthier people. We need to do something about our sports fields. I think so too. So basically we need to keep people fit. It teaches life skills. It actually produces higher academic performance of rangatahi. It connects communities, a sense of belonging and volunteers. It strengthens our city through employment opportunities, and it lowers health risks associated with physical inactivity. And, you know, it has a significant impact on our city. Our network, as I've said, has a generally poor quality across the board situation with its fields. So in 2018, we did investigations into the field quality. So we got sports turf experts in to investigate the fields and understand how they can cope with amounts of activity on them. We worked with our clubs and codes to understand how much activity was being directed at them. So this was the supply and demand work that was done as a result of the Spaces and Places strategy. Basically, across our 35 fields in the city, we have 180 teams wanting to use them. Calculating how much play they do a week and the condition of the fields, we were in a situation where we had a deficit.
Recording in progress.
So we've got 79 hours a week of deficit in terms of what our teams want to exercise on our fields. And with the growth projections from 2018, that would increase to 98 hours a week. Now, what this means is people are playing on fields that can't stand up to it, and it causes a lot of problems for the fields. As part of that work on what are our fields like, there were some improvements suggested. You know, we can do things to fields. We can make improvements to them to increase their capacity. The survey that was done in 2018 suggested improvements on a desktop sort of exercise, considering things like drainage, irrigation, how we can actually work operationally on the fields, and suggested a number of opportunities to increase what we could do, but all of those opportunities needed further exploration. So we have since done some work in that space. Here's a result of what happens. I mean, I'm sure some of you will see these. On the right-hand side of the image, we've got two parks that have inherently poor sports fields, and that's probably a reasonably good day of what they look like. On the left-hand side, we've got a good park that actually has quite good fields, but when it gets over pressure, these are the sorts of results that happen. And as I said, we end up with field closures at a much higher frequency than our counterparts. At the same time as we were investigating the sports fields, we were working with small-bone clubs on a sports hub opportunity in the Smallbone Park area. Sports clubs in New Zealand are facing increasing pressure on just sustaining, just operating. Long gone are the days of making your revenue across the bar and keeping the club ticking along because of the Saturday post-match functions. And so clubs struggle, committees struggle, and they've got older facilities that look after need higher levels of maintenance. So unfortunately, clubs get heavily involved in simply looking after their buildings rather than actually helping develop their club sports and their teams. So shared facilities is a new model in the last decade or so that's appeared that is actually making significant improvements for club sustainability, and in Smallbone they were looking at this option of trying to create a hub. So feasibility work was done. It was shown that with around 2,350 members across 4 clubs and codes, it would present a sustainable opportunity for a joint facility. So we started to get some signals that, hey, working together, collecting clubs together can make some positive impacts. We were also looking at the Rotorua Stadium at this time. The situation with the stadium is it's a pretty old building. It's got a fantastic field. It's got a limited grandstand. Since the stadium was created, we've had a whole raft of international quality stadiums come online in New Zealand. There's only so many games to go around. How do we increase the utilisation? What can we do with the Rotorua Stadium to give it a unique point of difference? One of the real inherent values of that Rotorua Stadium is it sits in amongst a pile of sports fields. A lot of stadiums are actually in a city now, or somewhere where there's very limited surrounding space to support them. Okay. The other thing, of course, that we've got in Rotorua is our unique cultural heritage. So really trying to create that point of difference, thinking about a tournament venue and a home of Māori sport was where we should be going to give us something in Rotorua that makes our stadium unique and sets it up for its position in New Zealand and even internationally, as we have seen. So this collective information around the stadium, around the sports hub, around the sports fields is where the Westbrook Sports and Recreation Precinct feasibility investigation came from. And it was focused around, right, we need to make improvements to our sports fields where we can, where there is value in making those improvements, and to cater for future and current demand, we need more fields. So we looked at Westbrook because there was all those other focusing areas on that as well. The objectives for the precinct at Westbrook were around creating a local community hub for outdoor sports, a destination park for passive and active recreation and all the well-being that comes from that. And a key part of that was the Utahina Stream Corridor and how we could use that, and create a preferred outdoor national tournament venue and a home of Māori sports at the stadium. So that was where the feasibility came from, and that was what the feasibility was working through. So you will have seen these images at the workshop that was presented to councillors prior to the last LTP in late 2019. That's the existing plan. We've got to the west of the Utahina Stream, we've got the Westbrook group in the top left, Rayboard Park, top mid-right, and the stadium at the bottom left. And then down on the right-hand side of the image, or on the eastern side of the Utahina, we've got Smallbone Park and the Springfield Golf Course. This was developed up with a group of consultants and quantity surveyors, urban designers, and people in expertise who'd done a lot of work with sports clubs and codes to understand their needs and to presenting a feasibility for what potentially this whole area could look like to meet some of those needs. As you'll see it there, up in the left-hand side of the image, we've got improvements to the whole Westbrook and Rayboard area. That was costed through for approximately $10 million. We could do all the drainage work on those fields, the irrigation work on those fields. We could provide the lighting, and we could provide the amenity buildings for changing and toilets and everything that would allow an increased utilisation of that area, increase the amount of game time we can get on those fields. The Rotorua International Stadium section and the home of Māori sports, that was costed up at about $16 million, which would involve significant improvements to the stadium building, improvements to the fields and the lighting to bring it up to national TV standards, and also to create a home of Māori sports building which would provide opportunities and administration for servicing national Māori sports codes and servicing tournaments, and potentially in the future even servicing visiting teams to partake in training and things like that. 3/4 of that sort of area was earmarked for external funding, not council funding, in that international stadium section. Smallbone Park, the majority of the spend in Smallbone Park that was identified was for the two blue parts in the middle of the picture, which is the new sports hub building, so a shared facility for multiple codes and a covered training area. Again, a significant amount of that, 2/3 approximately, would be external funding. And the last key section, which was development of 2/3 of the area of the Springfield Golf Course to create 7 sports fields, an artificial training area, the ancillary services to support that with, an artificial turf training area, ancillary services such as parking and a active and passive recreation area in the middle of it, including the Utahina Stream improvements. On the right-hand side of the feasibility image was a proposal that, hey, maybe there could be a housing opportunity on the eastern end of the golf course, the 11 hectares associated with that. That was drawn up and again presented by urban designers, people involved with modern urban design, as a potential concept, what that housing area might look like. A mix of high and low density housing was the suggestion at the time. Would create approximately 155 lots, and using modern amenity design principles, about half of the space would be used for lots, half of the space would be used for green corridors and roading. And the green corridors would include play spaces, boulevards, and a surrounding green belt around the facility. In terms of since that feasibility report came to Council back in late 2019, a lot of questions were asked by the Council in that process, and a lot of questions have also been asked about some of the other things that was proposed there and what else do we need to know. So we've looked into some areas internally and some using external staff time, and we've also looked into some using external consultants. The questions were raised around where did the land come from. All of this area in the Westbrook Precinct area was bought by Council. The land to the west of the Utahina Stream was Ngāti Karenga, which was then acquired by the Potton family, and then the Potton family moved that on to the Council through subdivision processes or to the Council via the Rotorua Rugby Sub-Union, who owned some of that land. On the other side of the stream, on the eastern side of the stream, that was part of the original Pukeroa Urua Whata block. So Crown acquired that as that Fenton agreement situation was changing and Crown was acquiring land. So the Crown acquired that, leased it to the Smallbone family. The Smallbone family then sold off sections to the Council, including ultimately the land that had been developed as a golf course by volunteers. When the Smallbone family decided to sell that, the golf club at the time in 1965 passed in their right of first refusal, and the Council bought the land. So it was all acquired by the Council through purchase, through subdivision by the intermediate owners. We've had questions around the lease and what is the situation with land valuation in there. The Council leased the golf course to the Springfield Golf Club in 1966. That lease was passed in 1994, and a new lease was formed from 1995, which expires mid-2027. Okay, there's a number of variations that happened to that lease during the time, but that's currently the situation. It's a lease that doesn't have a right of renewal. It specifically says this has no right of renewal. It expires in 2027. In terms of what is that land worth, as part of some of the feasibility work, evaluation was done on the 11 hectares that was sort of potentially earmarked as a possible housing development area. That valued up in 2018 at about $8 million. It's estimated to be worth about $12 million now, just as it is. There was questions raised about our existing sports fields. How much could we actually get out of them? Because remember, that first report suggested there could be improvements made. So we've done more detailed work on that. We've done a lot of work on actually the Westbrook and Rayboard Park fields, because that was identified in the feasibility study as an area that we should be developing anyway. We can get more capacity out of those fields. For between $1 and $2 million, we could potentially get up to 50 hours of capacity out of those fields. One of the things with that is to utilise that 50 hours, then you need to do quite a bit more work as well. We need to put in lights, we need to do a whole lot of other infrastructure in terms of changing in toilets and things like that. And then we need to change the way clubs operate to get people to actually play on a field for that length of time. You basically need to have Friday night games, you need to have Saturday games and Sunday games, you need to have 5-day midweek training. And so there are ways that you can do it, but it involves quite a bit of work with the clubs and the codes. We also had Puringa Park assessed, and the feedback from that was really no matter what you spend on Puringa Park, you are not going to get any extra playing time on those fields. You might make slight improvements to the quality of the playing surface, but irrigation and drainage is not going to be worth it. For example, we tried to drain one field in Puringa with field tiles. The sulphur came up through the field tiles and killed the grass, and the field was out of commission. So drainage in those sorts of areas just don't work. Neil Hunt Park, again, you could do some work in there. You would increase the quality and probably decrease the number of days it was closed, but you're very unlikely to make really any impact on how many more hours can get played on those fields. So those are more detailed investigations that we've done. Question was, why don't you think about buying some land somewhere else? So we've had a land acquisition report looked at. Basically, there is limited opportunities around the city for large areas of flat land that would allow you to create sports fields areas. What opportunities there are have fairly significant time and financial risks, but the estimate from last year would be that you could probably get a 2-field area for about $6 million, and you could probably get somewhere big enough to put 4 fields on and the parking and the necessary buildings for about $12 million. Then you would need to develop them to put the fields and things on. We had an ecological report done on Westbrook Golf Course. That ecological report found that the golf course and the whole Smallbone area is fairly typical of a large open space in a city ecologically. It contains the expected species that you would find in any large open public park. The significant opportunity ecologically in there is the stream corridor. And we've already heard about work in terms of improving water quality and things like that. There is a real opportunity in that Westbrook Sports Precinct area to improve the Utahina stream corridor with riparian planting, as long as it doesn't block up the stream and slow the water down, unless that's what Stavros wants. The other question too was around, actually, is the golf course suitable for sports fields? And the answer to that is yes. An assessment was done on the soil on the golf course, and it's perfectly suitable for creating sports fields. So those are additional pieces of work that we've done to try and better understand a raft of the questions that have come forward around that initial feasibility work. Question around, so who have we been speaking to about this? During the whole feasibility development, there was a lot of work done with the clubs and the codes. We had a steering group that included Te Papa Takaro on it to get who was involved with the whole feasibility concept and a lot of the discussions that have gone through with that as well. So pre and post feasibility, we have been communicating with the clubs and the codes. We've also been talking with Springfield Golf Club right from the initiation of the idea, and we've continued to meet with them. When we have had information, we've been trying to meet quarterly when we've had information to continue to answer some of the questions that have come forward. And in early March 2020, we did a Springfield resident mail drop, and we put up on our Korero Mai website, we put up information. There was some media release about the feasibility idea, and we had a feedback loop coming back through that Korero Mai. We had about 90 responses through our feedback, and there was support for the concept. There was opposition to the concept. There were clubs who wanted to be involved. There were clubs who didn't want, who were there, who felt they might not be involved in the future. But we had a full range of feedback from that. Now, COVID-19 turned up in late March 2020, and that changed our timeline. The whole situation with COVID-19 and the Build Back Better program was that let's tie-ho on Westbrook. We've got some really big priorities coming for the city that we don't fully understand. Let's not try and rush Westbrook into the 2021-31 LTP. Let's use this time to gather more information and fully understand what the situation is there in terms of whether this feasibility should be taken to the next level. Since then as well, of course, Saving Springfield has had a number of public meetings. We were, council staff invited and presented at a public meeting at the golf course, and as you're all aware, Saving Springfield presented a petition to the council in April of this year with just over 5,000 signatures asking that the council recognise that the golf course be a taonga, be recognised as a taonga in Rotorua, and that the lease for the golf club continue. We have continued engagement with the clubs and the codes and other stakeholders carrying on throughout this whole process. Now, in terms of where we go from here, from a sports field perspective, or from a sport, recreation and open space perspective, I'll talk about that, and then JP will talk about some of the other areas. But things have changed quite a lot in the last couple of years, which is no surprise to anyone. And we really need to understand our whole sports field and our open space network and what the provisions are for a changing city. We've had significant economic and lifestyle effects from COVID. We're going through a period of very strong city growth, much stronger than we had in 2018. We have got growth plans and growth areas across the whole city. We need to understand what that is going to mean in terms of where people go to enjoy open space. And we've also had changes to our recreation and sporting activities. We don't fully understand what they are, but we know that that position has changed. So there are a number of things that we need to do before we can really make a concrete decision on our open space and sports field network provisioning going forward. We need to renew our sports field supply and demand and assess that in our open space policy. We want to look at code-specific network plans. Now, that's part of what has been identified through the regional spaces and places and strategy. Regionally, the things like golf is being looked at, things like hockey are being looked at. How do we sit in those contexts regionally? And the way to package this all up and to understand how our other sectors impact on it, and some of these other things are going to compound on what's happening with our open space, is a play, active recreation and sport plan, which is effectively an update of our 2016 sport and recreation strategy. These are being rolled out nationally. They're being strongly supported by Sport New Zealand, but it will help us identify our priorities and guide those future provisioning needs, development needs, potentially rationalisation needs for our open space across the city. We'll come back to some of this towards the end of the presentation, but we are clearly in a place where there is a lot of stuff happening, a lot of stuff changing, and we need to gather further information before we make any decisions on what is a very large open space that has a number of strategic and potentially competing values for it. And so we need to package that all up together and understand it before we decide on what we're going to do with this area of land. So I'll pass on to JP.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and obviously I become the continuation of the earlier presentation and discussion, and as Rob introduced it there, he's been working in that recreational space, recognising the challenges and demands that we have around growth and the conditions of our recreation areas in the planning that had led to the 2018 decisions and proposals. So Stavros and I start becoming the and or but question to the best use of some of our key green spaces in the city. And really for us, it comes back to this area around we have had sustained growth. We are in a housing deficit, and I would go so far as to say, and we've talked about it, a housing crisis. We need to see 6,000 homes being made available in our district over the next 10 years to support the population projections and the current deficit we have. Now, clearly we've got a number of greenfield areas that can be used for growth, but they are not the single answer here. And as Stavros and I alluded to, one of the most important changes that we're looking for our urban area is around intensification. Now that obviously from our earlier discussion has implications around stormwater and the stormwater management, and you overlay that with the challenges of the climate change, and we start having to look back at what land holdings we have, and they become incredibly strategically important for us to manage urban growth, urban development, and the recreation outcomes for our community. So they start becoming an and conversation. And probably picking up on Councillor Kumar's earlier question, and actually at some points the and might become a but, that the stormwater solutions and the requirements around city development may trump the need of actual recreational use. So I think that's one of the key things we need to make sure we're bringing that information to you so you can make those informed decisions and making those decisions about whether there's compromises or trade-offs that need to be made. So the intensification plan changes are required moving forward. The first one we need to notify is August of next year, and so obviously that then relates very strongly to the modelling and the potential around flood management. So a huge piece of work that's required by ourselves and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. Stavros and I talked about the infrastructure strategy and our infrastructure acceleration fund application that went to government, seeking about $113 million to improve stormwater infrastructure across the city. About 66 million of that was targeted to the western side of the city, so really focused on the Utahina and Mangakakihi catchment. And the opportunity there to improve the stormwater management and the use of our green spaces for some of that management of that infrastructure. So really critical for us to start seeing how the plans that have been created from a recreation perspective now need to be merged against the urban growth and development requirements for the city as well. So this map here, and I just put it in here, was again one of those things that's been driving some of our conversations about where we go with intensification. So with that, critically, one of the values you start looking at where you can intensify is where are the green spaces, because that's really important to communities. So the preservation and protection of the right green areas in the right locations actually support thriving communities. So really critical that it's not an either-either conversation here, it's how do we make sure the two parts come together really effectively to make sure we're addressing housing, but also making sure that there's the green spaces to support communities. So we're also looking in this one, highlight some of the suburban centres and also the key transport corridors and some of the greenfield areas that have been identified for the city. So it all goes into the need for that modelling and that consideration of city development. Rob highlighted the potential cost of acquiring land in a greenfield scenario to put sport fields in place. Obviously that would be as an alternative use to actually seeing houses developed on some of that greenfield land on the fringes of the city. So again, this is those trade-offs between a good community and a good form of a community, but also making sure we have the right kind of facilities in the right places. So I think Councillor Tapsell asked the question about the three parts of the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund. So as you've seen us talk and present before, Stavros and I have been very much talking around that western side is around the community detention and catchment areas to manage the flow of the water that goes into the Utahina. So again, that was this look of looking back up through our green corridors to see if there's any effective locations for us to detain, manage or design to flood. so that the private property isn't flooded further down the Utahina. So that's the real focus of that western part of our Infrastructure Acceleration Fund application. The central part, and Councillor Tapsell's comment was answered by Stavros to say, look, what we need to do in that area is actually redirect some of the water that already is directed toward this Utahina away from the Utahina, directly to the lake or towards the Puringa. So we manage the stormwater from the central zone away from that stream where there's the most significant flooding risk. And obviously on the eastern side, around the East Side Wellness Plan, there's been Crown Infrastructure Partnership funding to support stormwater management in the Whananui developments, but we also have to see how that gets moved across the lower parts below Tenai Road towards the lake and effectively cleaned and managed through into that space as well. So that was the focus of that Infrastructure Acceleration Fund applications. As I say, significant amount of modelling, design and decisions around where are the best trade-offs and management opportunities for that stormwater will need to follow any decision around that infrastructure funding from government. So really important for the next few years. Again, this simply repeats what you saw in that earlier presentation. The Regional Council modelling at the moment is just climate. So we need to start working very closely with them to make sure we can factor in the modelling around what intensification might look like. How does that change the amount of stormwater running off and how quickly? And then from there, there's the opportunity to start considering those engineering solutions. And as we've said, no one wants to go to the policy solutions at this stage. It's engineering solutions we need to focus on. The other part of it, and we've alluded to it as well, is if you detain and manage the stormwater and flood onto green spaces, you get better water quality outcomes than seeing the flooding of private property, particularly those industrial areas. And there is still further opportunities to enhance those green corridors down around the streams as well. So again, critically, the last piece is we have lots of work to do with the Regional Council on identifying the potential solutions around managing stormwater for the city now in response to climate, but also for the future as we respond to growth and development. So two critical parts of that. And then, of course, we have a decision where and how we fit the recreational needs and requirements around those stormwater management options. So again, just repeating, those are the challenges we need to address, the flooding potential of private property, unless there is some form of response put forward in engineering or in management of resources. So those green spaces become critical opportunities for us back up through the Utahina and Mangakakahi streams. So apologies for this. This is a bit of a diagram that we probably shouldn't have left in, but it was one of my thinking diagrams. So it just highlights how there's many different factors that come into our future decision around Westbrook and the Springfield Golf Course, and actually any of those core reserves down through those two streams. So if you look to the top left, Rob has talked about the Sports Bay of Plenty Spaces and Places strategy. So that's a regional strategy around key facilities and requirements. Rob had talked about a lot has changed and we need to start thinking about our own local strategy. So that was that play, active recreation and sports plan. So picking up on some of the old strategy work we've done and start refreshing that with what do we actually need. Rob has also talked about the open space levels of service policy, which is again an important guide for what we do with recreation spaces across the city. So we do have thriving, active communities. And then that leads to the discussion around the quality and supply and demand of our sports fields and how we manage that. So that's a technical input. And on the other side too, there is actually some regional work being done by around the Bay of Plenty Regional Facility Network Review. So Golf New Zealand is actually looking at its own strategy view across the Bay of Plenty. And then very much in the bottom right-hand corner is the work that Stavros and I have been working on. So we have a spatial plan that talks about where we see development occurring around the city. So Whananui, Pukehangi were the key greenfield pieces. attached to the city urban area. Intensification then becomes pretty important for absorbing those other homes that we need over the next decade. So leading out of that, and apologies for my three-letter acronyms, spatial plan will move towards the language of the National Policy Statement, which is a FDS, Future Development Strategy. You're aware that we were trying to present to you today, but we've just been held up on getting the work completed, which is the Housing and Business Assessment, which is a key base information for plan changes. And then subsequent to that, of course, we've got our Infrastructure Acceleration Fund application. So, and our housing strategy, and most importantly also our climate action plan. So they also become critical inputs into our decision around how we use our strategic land holdings and how they might be used to address all of those issues collectively. So we have many pieces moving here, and we still have a lot of work to do before you would be in a position to make any decisions around some of our key reserve networks back through the city. So really that's the kind of challenge we now have for you. There is a lot more work to do.
Just to put a context around that work, you know, a play, active recreation and sport plan, they are being rolled out throughout the country. They're being done in sort of 12 to 18 months. So if we got that initiated early in the next year, we would be well informed for the next LTP conversation. We would go through a consultation process to inform that plan, and then we would go through a consultation process after that plan has been drafted to get final feedback on what that means for our whole network of open space and sports fields across the city. The district plan changes in relation to housing and infrastructure, again, they would need to be targeted towards influencing investment decisions in the next LTP. So JP's talked about the housing section being initiated mid next year. Infrastructure would need to work through that same sort of beginning timeline. In fact, they will be hand in hand, I am sure, and so that we can inform the next LTP. So the intention is that, you know, before that late 2023, as we're rolling into consultation for the 24-34 LTP, we will have the information that the council and the community need to be able to make better informed decisions about some of these strategic open space assets that we have across the city, of which our Westbrook Precinct area is certainly one of those. So the final slide is the recommendation from the report, and we'll leave that there, and happy to take any questions.
Well, look, thank you for that, the report. I mean, obviously substantial exploratory work has already been done, and so thank you for that. What it does highlight is that we're a diverse community with diverse needs, and so that is the challenge that lies ahead for us. What I propose to do now is to take a 10-minute break so we can clear our messages, etc., and then we can move into questions. And so councillors, we'll take that 10-minute break now and be back. What's our time? Yes, 11:30 we'll be back, councillors. Thank you. And then we'll move into our questions. Thank you.
smashed open that this is a much wider debate needed here. And but my question probably to you, Rob, because we hear about stadium debates regionally, with regional council looking at, you know, should we get a stadium, golfing strategy, horse racing. How active are we involved in all those wider issues that actually will impact on what you bring back to us in your time frames? Because I find those are discussions going on around us without us.
Through you, Madam Chair. The Bay of Plenty has a Sport New Zealand supported spaces and places strategy, which hopefully most councillors recall. A lot of the work that goes on with that strategy and the steering group, of which I'm a member, along with other TA equivalents across the region, we meet regularly and we go through what is happening in that regional and national understanding space. We also have some strong relationships with national sporting organisations, in particular around, you know, team sports, and so we're also coordinating and corresponding with them on a number of what are those national initiatives. Facility reviews is a classic. A lot of the national sporting organisations are continually looking at what is their offering. You know, the whole sport and recreation area is a dynamic sort of market, I suppose, and so that continually is reviewed, and we have strong relationships with those NSOs and our regional sporting organisation RSOs in those areas as well.
Inform the report that you had a time frame that will come to us next year?
For the Play Active Recreation and Sport Plan, yes, we will be working with regional and national RSOs, and Sport Bay of Plenty are also considering a regional Play Active Recreation and Sport Plan as well. So how that sits over the whole region, not only just how Rotorua might fit with our particular needs that we need to prioritise.
So that brings me, last question on this, to the International Stadium. I hope you're advocating that we want to keep our stadium here, which is absolutely vital, and why on earth would you develop another one in another part of the region? And that's a really sensitive issue when we go back to how we got it here, what a value it is to us, our aspirations for the home of Māori rugby, and that is a discussion we're not even part of in the wider region. I'm going to put it on the agenda for the regional mayors meeting because I think it's critically important, especially when we're looking at our play and open spaces policy.
The stadium is recognised in the regional spaces and places strategy as a regional asset, and there is not another need for another regional asset. How individual TAs might then treat the strategy is up to them, but it's clearly identified in that. Much like the aquatic centre as well, with a 50-metre outdoor pool.
Councillor Yates, then Councillor Donaldson.
Kia ora, and through you, Madam Chair, nei rā te mihi kia kōrua o tira kia koe, Rob. Just over the weekend, I noticed a post around the most recent weather conditions we've had, which has actually meant that during level 2, sporting codes have also been affected by that. The question that I have is around, whilst we've got a hub concept there, is there also consideration for more indoor facilities and tournament venues that are suitable for multi-weather circumstances, as well as multi-disciplinary activities? So this was a community concern.
Thank you, and back through you, Madam Chair. Indoor facilities have been recognised regionally as needing an assessment. So again, as part of the Regional Spaces and Places strategy, there have been a number of things that have been identified as needing further work to understand the district and regional picture. Indoor facilities is one of those. The other big one is water access facilities. So those are two pieces of work that we hope to come out of the Spaces and Places strategy that will start looking at who's got what and who needs what.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, two questions. Rob, the Puringa Park you've alluded to, a great report, by the way, because it just shows the magnitude of what we're grappling with here, both in terms of infrastructure for growth and for future sport. The presentation on the stormwater diverting central Utahina to the east, is that going to further exacerbate the high water table under Puringa Park? That's I see, and I think about the City Link already, future-proofing that City Link project that's currently underway, the cycle shared path. And my other question is, just in terms of the change going on in sport, is around gender inclusivity as a factor. Is that something that's being considered? I mean, once upon a time, you know, in terms of outdoor sports, netball and hockey were it for women, but now we see the men playing netball, and we see increasingly women getting into league and rugby. So as well as population growth, you've got gender growth in those outdoor sports from women.
Thank you, Councillor. I might leave the diversion of stormwater west and its implications on Puringa Park to Stavros, if he can quickly ponder that while I'm addressing the gender inclusion question. Certainly in a play, active, recreation and sport plan, you know, getting something done that's current and up to date and is forward-looking would address those sorts of things, because those are implications for all sorts of facilities in terms of, you know, we need to know that for toilet blocks, we need to know that for changing and all sorts of things like that. So that sort of current thinking would be developed in that plan, and then what does that mean for our open space recreation areas?
And look, we've certainly seen it in mountain biking, I have to say, which is, you know, just a huge increase in the number of women participating in that since facilities were provided close to the forest. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Chair, I've got 3 questions, or 4, 3A and 3B, I suppose. The first one goes back to the policy process itself. Rob was very, very careful to step his way through, looking ahead, and I really appreciate that. It's very, very important, personally for me, that when we put together a long-term plan and we have it cast in the with budgets and so on, that it is the item, the issue has prior approval by the council. And I wondered how we came to be in a position where we developed this proposal without it ever having been approved by council. And let me illustrate the importance of that by going to the proposals before us. There are 5, the 4th of which reads, committee support officers completing a comprehensive plan to inform decisions on the Westbrook Sports and Recreation Precinct or the Springfield Golf Course. What's dismaying about this is that it appears to preempt the alternatives down to 2, and that the first one, that is the precinct, is favoured. And this degree of predetermination is that one of the reasons why so many people in the Springfield community feel so alarmed by the nature of the policy process to this point. I wonder if thought can be given to keeping open the possibilities of a more integrated approach to developing a precinct while possibly retaining or changing components of the golf course. At the moment, they're being cast as polar opposites. Thank you, Rob.
I hope you could hear that, Rob.
Yes, and I think in response, the question was around precedent being given to one over the other in the way the recommendation might be written. But probably, and if that is interpreted, there's certainly no intent than that, because I think the whole context of this discussion is around we can't make a decision yet. We need to understand a lot more, and I very happily admit that we need to understand a lot more around our open space and our sports field network before we make any decision on what should happen in that area with that strategic open space asset. Now, we've got JP beating me up with a housing question and Stavros kicking me with an infrastructure question. And so we really need to understand all of this before we make any decision on whether it's a sport and recreation precinct or whether it's a golf course or whether it's something else. And I think that's the key information that we want to get across here, because it is such a strategic asset that piece of open space has in that catchment in this city.
Thank you, Rob, because we're not preempting anything.
My second question, through you, Chair, relates to that answer quite closely. That is that if you're signalling an openness to all options, combinations of options that would capture the key ideas behind both a precinct and a golf course, I wondered if we could give thought to, quite soon, having a presentation on the opportunity for Rotorua to become a national and international golf tourism destination.
Councillor, I think we looked sideways at each other, so I made the mistake of leaning forward towards my microphone. I think when you looked at that slide we previously had where we talked about some of the decision-making inputs that need to be taken, one of the things that was highlighted there was actually there's a piece of work that Golf New Zealand is doing around the regional requirements, growth, development of golf. So Councillor, I would think we probably need to wait till Golf New Zealand finishes that regional discussion, and then I think we could segue off that into a discussion around what does that mean for us as a location or a destination. So maybe that's the best place just to pick up that conversation if that's, to me, that gives us at least a context.
And your final question, Councillor McPherson?
Thank you, JP. I'm delighted to hear that, because the integration of perspectives on alternative sports opportunities, I think, from various levels is a very important part of this work. I'm cut down now to 3 questions. I'll set aside one question in favour of this one. That is that my knowledge of the sports clubs around Rotorua, we've all visited them from time to time, a characteristic which is common is that they are as much socio-cultural organisations as they are sporting code organisations. They all have rich histories of self-financing and idiosyncratic values, cultures derived from the leaders of those groups. But one key factor is that they are fiercely independent, intensely competitive, and they want to run their own show and take delight in their own successes. So one of the assumptions...
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Here's my question.
Just a moment, there's a point of order here. Just a moment. Yes, what's the point?
It was the assumptions that were made by Councillor McPherson with regards to sporting codes that he was referring to.
Thank you. Just put your question succinctly, please, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. Given the background, what is the evidence for a demand across the whole city for these clubs to stop being so self-determining and becoming part of an amalgamated set of services. I find that whole set of arguments do not cohere with the nature of the current clubs. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Certainly, I can answer that. Through the work with the feasibility study and the steering group and the consultation with clubs and codes, there is a strong interest in collaborating in shared facilities. There isn't a strong interest between the Whakarewarewa and the Kahukura Rugby Club sharing a club room. You know, that doesn't really work. But you can get a hockey association and a football club and a cricket club and a squash club all in one building without any trouble at all. And there is numerous models across the country where that works. Blake Park in our neighbouring Tauranga, I think, has about 9 codes working out of one building. And so there is, and during this process, we did get strong support from football, potentially some of the rugby league, and interest from some of the rugby in joining in a facility like this, where we've also had hockey, cricket, and squash interested. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rob. I mean, there's a new way of working these days. Clubs want to remain viable, so they just work differently than in the past. Mr. Berryman-Kemp and then Councillor Kumar.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Look, the question that sprang to mind for me is what would happen to the disused fields? Because if I get the potential direction of the PARS plan, I assume that it will work out what our sport field requirements are. I've also made an assumption that that would mean that we would be retiring some of those fields. So would the question regarding what happens to the disused fields be included in the PARS plan under rationalisation?
I don't see that the Play Active Recreation and Sport plan would make a decision on disused fields. It would identify what is strong in the network and what is not needed in the network, and then any decision after that would involve a public process to decide what might happen with it. You know, and there's a variety of other interested parties as well, in terms of if it was a gifted reserve, you know, there'd be all sorts of obligations to go through, but I wouldn't expect that to come out of a Play Active Recreation and Sport plan.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Rob. Thank you very much for your explanation today. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about, maybe then straight to a question. And I believe of the five recommendations, 2 or 3 things will roll over itself, because number 5 especially, because it's going to be a discussion with Regional Council. The thing that worries me is number 4, and that's what I'm coming to. You have indicated over here in that report that this could become a home of Maori sports and a destination recreation park in executive summary. Then in key findings, you say it's a unique proposition for stadium, then use example of home of Maori sports would create utilization and opportunities and sustainability. Now, I don't understand that, because from my understanding since 2016 was that Rotorua Lakes Council was trying to make Rotorua Stadium as a home for Maori rugby. Just earlier we heard Her Worship mention as well that it would be aspirant Maori home for rugby. Now the whole thing has come about in this report for the first time that I've seen it, that is going to be a home for Maori sports. And I just wanted to know a little bit of elaboration as to where did that come in, and when you talk sports, or you're talking just rugby? Because I've known in the last 5 years there has been lots of Maori codes that have come to the council to seek funding, and they have been denied and declined.
They don't usually come. Oh.
The concept for the home of Māori sport is not just rugby focused. I mean, we've got the whole idea of it is that we want to encourage participation in sport and particularly encourage our tamariki and rangatahi to get involved in sport. We've been working with a variety of codes over the last 3 to 4 years through Steve and the sport development team, and so we are hosting national Māori tournaments at Westbrook for league, touch, rugby, age groups. So Kuranai Tuku is a classic example, which is just over the fence. So there is a massive opportunity there to create the value proposition. Now, what it would actually mean for the precinct is that there's a cultural foundation that could be put over the whole precinct, much like we're doing with the lakefront and we've done with Whakarewarewa Forest, in terms of designing and encouraging an understanding of Rotorua's unique space. And so nothing's excluded, and we want to try and use the idea, and again, it's a concept. The idea was to use this as a point of difference that we could then help increase the utilisation of the stadium.
Yes, if you have another question.
And just supplementary to that, just in case Thomas, then Deputy C, doesn't choke you with the money matters. I'm sorry, I mentioned Deputy C, I believe he's a financial controller, so my apologies if I was incorrect there. DC? Okay. My other question is, should we not then wait for the findings of what the regional council come up with in case if we are to go with number 4 before we invest any more money or invest any more money into this?
Developing a play, active, recreation and sport plan will be informed by other potential uses of open space. For us to understand our network, we won't only be looking at it from a sport and recreation perspective. We need to fully understand those other implications on our network before we are clear on how much open space we need and what we're going to use it for.
And all pieces of work need to be undertaken. We just can't sit and wait for one piece and then move on. You've got to make sure that we don't lose the momentum. I think that's the most important thing. Your Worship, I'm trying to get through the other councillors. They've got quite a list. Thank you. If you'd like to pose your question then.
You confirm that the concept of home of Māori sport has been discussed at this meeting, at this committee meeting for a long time. It's not a new concept. This is not the first time. We've had it in operation and monitoring since Charles Sturt was actually on this council. He worked with League, Touch and Rugby Union alongside of me, and it's nothing new. Could you confirm that, please?
Yes, I can. I mean, in terms of the feasibility workshop, when we talked about it in late 2019, there was images of potential Whare-styled buildings and things like that. So it was in the information that's come through. And it's something. It's a fantastic opportunity to keep looking at for our point of difference.
Thank you. Councillor Tapsell, then Mr. Thank you, Persini Tule. Thank you, Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you, and I'm sure that Councillor Sturt would have been over the moon to see us planning for the future generations of athletes in Rotorua. The question that I have is just around how far forward are we planning for with this significant strategic asset? And I note that in here the value was around $8 million, but someone said now it's around $12 million. That's quite significant. So we need to make the most of what we've already got. And I don't think our community, no, I know our community will not have the appetite to spend millions more on acquiring new fields when we already have a great asset there ready to use. So how far forward are we planning for? Because we are fortunate enough to have the opportunity now to design this public space to be appropriate to meet future and current and future growth needs, and that's quite unique. I mean, if you look around at the Bay of Plenty at Tauranga as an example, and they are completely restricted by land. But I also understand that here in Rotorua, as an example with housing, it's been mentioned here in this room as well about I think our currently zoned land is going to run out within 5 or so years. So when we look at that, it's quite significant that we think very carefully about this decision, and the only way we can make a good decision is if we are well informed. So I'm very excited to see this come up so that we can ensure that we have a comprehensive but also a wide-ranging view when we look at the future of this asset.
Through you, Madam Chair. Certainly, the Play Active Recreation and Sport plans that have been developed look out to 2050 sort of thing. And certainly from that perspective, understanding our open space. I know, with the infrastructure strategy, we've got a 30-year infrastructure strategy that sort of aligns with the same timing. So I would expect that that's the sort of horizon we're looking at to make sure that we can coordinate and understand all these impacts on our open space. That comment about the valuation, that was for 11 hectares of 33 hectares of the golf course. It was a part of it. But it's certainly, we need to understand it a long way out, and there's a whole lot of new growth scenarios and all sorts of things happening since we put the feasibility to you in 2018. Or was developed in 2018 and put to you late 2019.
And just want to signal that I'm happy to move it after questions.
Thank you. Mr. Biasini Tule, thank you.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Kia ora korua. Rob, really appreciate the mahi you do. And this, what I know is that Rotorua breeds sports champions, and we're really good at a whole range of sports. I've got two kind of small questions. One, the context is Israel Adesanya came from Rotorua, is now a world champion in UFC. But sports like his, and I'm going to be a geek again, esports. So esports is the fastest growing code in the city. Rotorua is actually one of the major hubs of esports. And like UFC, MMA, esports gets no support from this council. Absolutely none. Even though delegations have come time and time again, these small codes like roller skating get very little support, esports, UFC. These are what make us world champions. So for me to watch a $60 million geek on a jock spend, this is the classic line whānau at school. It's the jocks versus us geeks, and sometimes us geeks get the mic. No way can we look at $60 million going to rugby, netball, the traditional codes, without some kind of looking into the smaller codes. So me, it's more about where are our priorities as a city. It's all good to play tradition, but the new codes are coming up, making us champions, and this council doesn't do a lot there. So I love what you do, don't get me wrong, but there are other codes like UFC, which made Israel a world leader, and like esports, that get no looking into this. But my question really comes from the strategic context picture. And you put up the diagram. And what concerns me is, where are the locals in that suburb, in that graph? And I bring this up, but my context is when Lumbercube came to Linmore.
No, I just want you to ask your question if you want.
Can I get that slide?
No, because you've just, when we ask questions and you ask a question relevant to the report that we've received and has been presented. So that's your question, and you should make it succinctly,
strategic context,
so that we can have, I'm not interested in your putting it in context. I'd like a question, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Where are the locals in that graph?
I think there's a crossover, and they're in most of the arms of that graph, and I'll just unpackage that. So when we start talking, I put up a previous picture there which showed some of the amenity mapping that we're considering. So as we develop a future view of how the city is going to develop, green corridors, reserves and areas are critical to that. So there is an incredibly important amenity value, a connectivity value to green spaces. So from a future development strategy and our intensification plan changes, central to that. So that was that bottom right-hand corner. If you went across to the bottom left-hand corner, there was the open space policy, which also talked about our needs around open space, neighbourhood reserves. I can't see why not. Yep. So again, just picking up, bottom right hand is about thriving communities. So suburban centres, amenity, walkways, pathways, connectivity is all part of the stuff that goes into, and if you remember, one arm of the housing strategy was thriving communities. So green spaces in communities is critical to that, and the facilities that go there. So walkable suburbs, playground provision, all of that stuff is part of those conversations. When you talk about Springfield, they have a beautiful view of a green space at the moment, so that is an important consideration, like the rest of the city. So there is an amenity value there. Across on the left-hand side, I talked there about the open spaces, levels of service policy. So that was the work that Rob and the team have done about what sort of reserve levels do you need within communities? So your neighbourhood reserves, how far is it to a neighbourhood reserve? How do we have the walking tracks, the cycleways that connect our city? That comes from some of that stuff. The next part then, and it goes wider than just that suburb, is where are our hubs around sports fields and sports complexes? So again, they have their input into Westbrook itself, but similarly to the communities that reside around Neil Hunt Park and things like that. So all of that feeds in on the other side, which again is part of that fit with this play, active, recreation and sports plan. So all of those changes in sporting needs, indoor facilities, codes where there's more of a gender balance, and new codes, particularly indoor ones, are all part of that strategy around that. So I would have said for those people who live in any particular suburb, they'll have a view of their local community, their local neighbourhood, and what is in their immediate 400 metres of walking space in the way of playgrounds and green spaces, but equally for some of our bigger sporting hubs, what's there and what's importantly funded. So I would have said in answering that question, actually they feed into most of our decision making. They've got a local view, but they also have a city view.
Yeah, I'm just conscious of our full well-beings and livelihoods, and I don't see the Springfield name. Like if you're talking about Te Aroha, we would love to see our name up there. And it comes, how do they, it's just hard. I can't see their name yet. It's all being talked. I find there's these compounding pressures of infrastructure and housing. And sometimes council may look like we're the guy with the hammer and all we do is see nails. And this just looks like a nail. One nail can do 3 problems. And just the exclusion of their name kind of, something doesn't reconcile with me because it just...
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Councillor Kaifong, then Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. JP, is it fair to say now that we have introduced if you like, a tension between the prioritisation of housing and sport, and in particular with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council report on that flood modelling and the now importance of considering Springfield as a detention area takes it away from being necessarily such a vital and important part of the sports strategy?
I think this would go back to Rob's comment about people kicking him or pulling him in a different direction. So the green space is incredibly important for us for connectivity, but in this scenario, yes, around stormwater management. And I think that's when I introduced it. We don't have the answer. And that's why, at this point, we're really much saying we need to do, under point 5, a significant amount of work so we can find out whether those competing demands are a and or a but. And because decisions around stormwater management are critical and must be made. and we've heard from the Regional Council, if we're to avoid some implications of future climate flooding, then we need to take some engineering solutions. So we haven't worked out what those are. When we have, they will have implications, and they may have implications for recreation uses. So that will be what then has to inform your future decisions under point 4.
So just on that, Madam Chair, I know Councillor Tapsell has signalled that she is happy to move the recommendation, but I'm wondering whether in item 4 that should be the Westbrook Sports Precinct, and I know you said and but I think it needs an and or, so that we're looking at a decision around a potential sports precinct with the PARS report, but we're also looking at Springfield, which could either be part of that or it could be part of the engineering solution. So would you consider that that would be a...
Madam Chair, you're actually picking up on a word change that we made. So in the agenda, we actually had the word or, so it read inform future decisions on the Westbrook Sport and Recreation Precinct or the Springfield Golf Course. We didn't see them as an either-either, so we actually removed the or and put the and. So maybe it could be and or, if that way we've got it either way.
I was just making sure that we were looking at, in terms of reporting, that we were covering all of the possibilities of what we would be using all of that area for, not just in relation to the sports precinct. So that covers my concern. Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning that, Councillor Kaifong.
Second it too, Madam
Oh, thank you. Councillor Maxwell and then Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you guys for the very comprehensive report. You've covered a lot of things that, yeah, in my mind's ticking over and got a whole host of questions, but I'll narrow it down to a couple.
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm mindful of that. Well, first of all, look, hey, sport is an important part of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and yep, into sport, out of court. And being on a trust that does distribute most of its funding, 80% of it, to amateur sport, you know, we've also noticed the trends that are changing. I mean, back in the day when some of us played or participated, there wasn't wakaama. There wasn't even volleyball happening. Basketball has grown huge every night of the week now down at the sports room. There's something on. And mountain biking, that's another, which is great for Rotorua, great for us. And
your question, Councillor?
Yeah, coming to it about, and Maori sport, you've touched on, it's not just for rugby. Rugby league is huge for the tournaments as well. My question is, I see in the report there where we're looking at some of the possible other places where some sport arenas could go to, and you had Nongata greened in there, and I think it'd be ideal, but it just takes so long to sort of get something going. I mean, if we had a Puka Tawhiro Park out there, out of Nongata, I reckon it'll solve a lot of the problems. So the question is, what's the possibility in Nongata for something like a Puka Tawhiro Park? That's the first question.
Councillor, you've been made aware that if you go back to our spatial plan, we had sort of 4 priority areas that we were looking at. So we've got Wharanui greenfield developments, we've got Pukahangi greenfield developments, we've got an inner city we need to address. And I think the last time I was here, we talked about how we've got a priority development area. If you go back to that spatial plan, Nongataha was an area that we needed to see some development occurring in. Now, if we have growth and development of Nongataha, then we will need recreation spaces, we will need schools, we will need some roading improvements, we will need a whole bunch of community facilities. So as we start looking towards future growth in communities as a priority like Ngongtaha, recreation and provision of sports fields and parks will be critical. And so that's where all of those other government departments and our own internal departments will need to be part of those conversations. So I'll throw to Rob there just to add on to that. But yeah, we'll need more fields in the future.
I need to agree with JP. I mean, a play active recreation and sport plan will look at those growth nodes and what do we have to support those areas. And you know, we've got a number of sport parks out there. There may, and there's certainly opportunities to increase what's available out there.
Yeah, and further to that, is there any reason why we can't work in with the secondary schools to utilise their fields and that as well? I mean, we drive past them, we see them empty so often, even on a Saturday. Yeah.
It's an interesting question because we've just had an ex-council contact who's now a Ministry of Education contact who may be able to help us in that respect. But generally the ministry are quite restrictive on the use of their spaces, and they do maintain them for premier sort of you know, school grade work as well. If anything, in Rotorua we probably have some schools actually training on public spaces as well, because they don't have the capacity within their own field area. You know, medical officers reserve is a classic for boys' high spillover. So you know, they have more than enough teams wanting to use their own fields. So there's often not a lot left for using it at other times.
And final question. Thank you. And JP, you mentioned next year, about August next year, there's some decisions to be made, which I'm pleased because many of us can see that we're going to need to do some homework ourselves. But you said a lot more work needs to be done, so it won't be part of, it'll be part of the long-term plan for 24 to 34. And I'm going to touch on that area. You touched on that on the fields of Springfield. It's a water storage place that could help further down the Utahina stream to where I am in Ohinamutu. And you said in the report it's going to be better water quality. So why are we sort of not taking that option up and leaving Springfield as it is?
I think we don't have the answer, Councillor. We've been trying to be really clear here that we've been shown the climate implications for flooding potential at the lower Utahina. I think the key now is to understand what the modelling might look like if we now superimpose housing intensification, so more runoff off properties as there's more hard surface and quicker. So once you start building the models to say how much water comes off our urban area, there's a new number, so more of it will come off. At that point, Stavros and the engineers need to figure out what do you do with it, and because ultimately if it gets into the Utahina in larger volumes or at quicker, then there's the risk of flooding. So we don't have the answers, but clearly, and Councillor Kaifong touched on it, our green spaces provide us an opportunity to hold back or detain that water without having to acquire additional properties and have our costs go up exponentially. So that has got to be the first view of our engineering solutions, is how do we use our green spaces. Now, in creating that answer, we'll then know what is compatible with that 1 in 50, 1 in 100, 1 in 500 year need. Knowing, of course, that those frequencies occur. Now, recreation then can be fitted around that, but it's what recreation and how much of a use of those spaces. So that's got to become our first question.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Thank you for the report, JP and Rob, really detailed, and it just makes me think how much things have changed since I've been involved with Community Board and Council. When I first, 8 years ago, we were talking about Rotorua, almost last person out, close the lights, and here we are with this hugely vibrant community and having to adjust to growth and not just soggy sports fields, but actually creating more areas for the growth that we're getting. Look, my question, and it's most probably a request as well, is just that when we're doing this comprehensive review, that we keep an eye on and look at our lakeside and rural sports fields and communities, not only in what they need, but also the opportunities they provide to bring perhaps other codes out to them and reintroduce more vibrancy out into our rural and lakeside communities as well as in a city. So will you be looking at those sorts of places? And I'm thinking of, the fields around Rotoiti, but I'm sure they're up in Mamaku and Reparoa and other places as well.
Yes, certainly a play active recreation and sport plan will look at that. I mean, there's been one done in Northland, and Northland's got a lot of examples of similar sort of, out of town field areas. So that'll all be included in terms of what that. But it's part of a comprehensive network. It's a district-wide plan.
Well, thank you for all of those questions. We have had a mover and a seconder. Councillor Tapsell's moved and Councillor Kaiwhanga's seconded. And I'm going to go straight to you if you'd like to. No? Mrs. Trumper?
So are we opening it
yes,
up? Just
we can, but I'm not going to. I mean...
Okay, I haven't spoken because I didn't actually have a question.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that councillors have wandered into the discussion at times. So thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Please do.
So first of all, I want to say thank you very much, JP and Rob, because there's been a hell of a lot of background work that's gone into this plan, and it's really just letting everybody know that this really does lead into a full and comprehensive assessment. And I go back to Her Worship's comment about Nongataha. Now, when that flood review group was put together, the panel kept it between State Highway 5 and State Highway 36. When the reference group was put together, we actually realised that that wasn't sufficient. We had to start at the Umarura, where that water body was 2.5 metres higher than what it had ever been for that 2018 flood. And it meant that it affected right down to the lakefront. So as a group, as a reference group, we moved the boundaries and have worked with Regional Council and Lakes Council, have worked very hard together to actually put a comprehensive mitigation plan together. Now, we've looked at a significant number of measures and options, and we have come and narrowed them down. Now, that's since 2018. That's how long it takes to put plans together. Now, I also sat through the Plan Change 2 submissions, and every submitter made a point about stormwater. What was going to happen with stormwater management? And one of the things that the commissioners came back with was that you had to look at mitigating downstream. And so from there, there's always intended and unintended consequences when you start with a plan change and you're working towards it. It's not just that development, it's the growth of the city, it's everything. So I see this plan, which was always going to take time to put together. It was never going to be done in a very short space of time. So I want to congratulate the team. They've put it together. It is totally interconnected between sport, infrastructure and housing. There is no one answer. And it's going to be a very tough decision for the new council to make when the LTP in 2024, when this goes out. The lease is not up for renewal. We know that, but who knows what the outcome will be when the plan is put together. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mrs. Trumper. You know, just for reminding us that there have been some learnings since Ngongataha, and I know that you've been very involved in that. And so, just to remind us of the fact that that yes, for there are people who are champing at the bit to telling us to get on with it, push it through, etc. Well, actually, we can't do that because it just doesn't have implications in one area. It does have implications in others as well. So, thank you for reminding us of that. Are there any further discussions on this item? Yes, Councillor Kai Fong.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Since I was seconding the motion and Councillor Tapsell didn't want to take up her right, I could perhaps just say that I'm happy to support this motion on the basis that it's time that we update some of the reports. We've got, you know, new flood modelling, growth, housing considerations, and of course COVID-19 means that we really need to be looking at doing things a little bit differently, and I'm happy to support it on the basis that it's assisting us with getting on with our housing intensification plans. It's a pity that we can't be doing things a lot quicker. And I know that that will actually be a cause for concern to some that are involved in relation to the Springfield Golf Course. But I think for the community at large, it's important that we do the work properly, that we take the time to consider what is the best use of the sports precinct area on the International Stadium side, what potentially could happen there, and also to look at the opportunity for Springfield as to whether or not it's used for water retention, a sports park, or it's part of the whole wider precinct. So I think that whilst that may not give any comfort to the Springfield Golf Course at this stage, the fact is that there's still 6 more years to go before the lease expires, and that there will be an opportunity for the community to have a much wider opportunity to be consulted and to have input when we do the long-term plan consultation on this. So I'm very supportive of this, given that there's now this new tension in there, and making sure that we're looking strategically at the Springfield Golf Course and not just as part of the sports precinct, but what are the other opportunities for the Springfield Golf Course going forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar, then your worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, through you, while I have accepted that 2, 3 and 5 are things that need to happen, I do not agree with 4, and that's become a bugbear. 1, because the name Westbrook Sports Precinct in Springfield, and the other brings Springfield Golf Club's lease. Well, I do understand that a study has to be done. It seems like there's study, and more study. So I cannot support it based on what I feel at this stage.
Thank you. Your worship.
Thank you. This is one of the most important reports, actually, that we've had before us. And it's going to be a decision for the next council. It's not just a decision about Springfield Golf Course. And Councillor Kumar's already declared a conflict of interest there, and I respect your position today.
Point of order. I did not declare any conflict of interest.
Well, we were certainly at the public meeting when you were going to save it, so in front of an enormous
Point of order. I did not declare even at that night that I had a conflict of interest.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll carry on with my speech. So this is the result of really a perfect storm, and thank you today for widening it right out. Thank you for bringing the information back. We did ask for it. We councillors asked for it. We needed to make a balanced decision about the future of the precinct and also the potential use of golf in the future. And we've got the report. It wasn't a delay mechanism, and now we've got it. We've got so much more granularity about the huge issues as a council that we're facing, and that is the housing crisis. And that should be the election issue next year. those councillors that are going to support how we're going to get 6,000 more houses by 2030. That's what was written behind this report today. Those councillors that are going to support mitigation around stormwater and actually managing flood protection for all of our community. And this is so critical for us. They're the big issues. They're the big issues that will be the issues next year, not championing one tiny part of the whole of our community's future growth and aspirations. This is a critical time, and you brought together the housing challenge that we've got, the stormwater challenge, the climate change challenge, and the open spaces challenges. You've brought them together for a very significant report. We've been accused of not answering questions from the media yesterday, and it was vital we had this discussion today before any of us said what our position was. I certainly wouldn't say what time frames were we going to work in till I heard this today. So thank you for bringing it. I can see this as one of the most critical issues that we're facing about the well-being of our community, a connected community, meeting our housing aspirations and our growth aspirations in a sustainable way and involving everybody. And I take that point that came about in the lessons learned from Nongataha. Where did we get it right? When we got the right people around the table to help us find the right solutions, which included Regional Council and Hapu. Very, very important, and that's something you should be really proud of. So this is really smashing it open. It's a much wider debate. We felt it when it last came to us at Council, but today you've made it very clear and you've put it on the table. I'm pleased to see the response from elected members and the questions, and also the support for this motion today. This is going to be Rotorua's challenge in the future, and we're all going to have to meet it face on, all of us. Those that don't like some of the things we're doing, bring your answers into the council table, put it before us, and then we'll find our way forward. This is a critical tipping point for Rotorua. So I'm thrilled to support this resolution today.
Thank you, Your Worship. And you might have added, and be prepared to have the hard conversations.
That's right.
Because that's what it'll take. So thank you. Councillor McPherson, and then I am going to give it over to Councillor Tapsell in case she might like to say a few final. Thank you, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. I can be brief. Like Councillor Kumar, and my very ended knowledge of how Springfield ticks and thinks, it's quite clear, it's very clear from this analysis, we've got to integrate our thinking on housing, on infrastructure, on stormwater, and with the future sporting facilities and services we provide to our people. The trouble that I have hangs on number 4. I indicated before, the exclusive focus on either precinct or the golf course. This is tragic contradiction. An unnecessary, it's a false dualism that's been created here, when whatever the solution on the stormwater side, we all know that the Springfield Golf Course has the capacity to hold, retain for 2 or 3 days, literally, not 10, but probably hundreds of tonnes of water and service our needs on the wastewater side of things. But contrasting, we either have this precinct or a golf course is an unacceptable statement at this stage, and it's simply not necessary. So with regret, I can't accept that, and therefore will vote against this.
Thank you.
Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Councillor... Thank you. Councillor Tapsell. Sorry, was there... Oh, Councillor Wang. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try and keep my one brief as well. I'm in support of this motion, and I think echoing my colleagues' comments as well. You know, the fact I think Councillor Kumar mentioned, it seems like it's just one investigation after the other. And I think, a long-term decision with such massive implications for our community, wouldn't you want to do your due diligence? The fact that this isn't just a sport issue now, it's managing our flooding risk, it's dealing with climate change, it's dealing with our housing crisis, and especially for our future generations and our young people right now, go and talk to those young people who are playing on those fields that are of not so good quality. Providing those kids with, and those future generations with, quality sports experiences, providing them with more diversity and experiences in those areas as well. And I think, we do need to be looking at that wider picture, how this will benefit. And this is really our basic job here, which is to make decisions that will benefit the whole of Rotorua, the whole of the district, the wider community, and also bearing in mind our future generations and to be making mokopuna decisions. So with that, I'm happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. And just a quick summary, I think we've had an incredibly good discussion, not only today, but through the process of reaching this point too. And I do want to acknowledge the many people in the community, especially from the golf course, who have shared their views. It's quite clear that this issue is significant for our wider community, and we know through the modelling, through the analysis, that it's only going to be even more significant as we start to realise that land use is very restricted in future. So getting it right now is going to be incredibly important, and as I've mentioned, you can't make a good decision unless you are well informed. Thank you for the report too, Rob. It's quite clear, signals in there the significant risk if we were to not do this analysis, and committing to any long-term use of the Westbrook Precinct before understanding those needs for play, active recreation and sport across the city would potentially result in future need for council to purchase further land and expand on the sports field network. So not only are we making the most of what we've got, but we're saving a lot of money for our future generations as well by getting it right now. So I'm so excited. I mean, as a previous sports person myself, before I got into politics, I've got national titles in 3 different sports codes, and taking my stepson and my family to this Westbrook area to play their sports now, I just see so much potential in this area. We turn out so many, not only world champions, national champions, but local champions, and they matter the most. So ensuring that we will always have a space for our children to go and play in future is incredibly important for this community and for this council, and I look forward to seeing the progress as we go. So thank you very much to the staff.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, it's been certainly, as you say, Councillor Taps, we've well covered with the discussion, questions and discussions this morning. So it has been moved and seconded. So I am now going to put recommendations 2 to 5, and I will read them out. 2, that the committee notes the nature and extent of the work that has been completed to date. 3, that the committee notes since the Westbrook Sport and Recreation Precinct was initially signalled, Rotorua has increasing pressures relating to housing and infrastructure that has increased the strategic value of this open space area. 4, that the committee supports officers completing a comprehensive play, action, recreation and sport plan to inform future decisions on the Westbrook Sport and Recreation Precinct and the Springfield Golf Course. 5, that the committee notes that officers will work with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council to complete all necessary modelling, planning and infrastructure design to support required residential growth requirements and reduce and manage flooding risk in the Utahina stream catchment. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you.
Recorded, please.
Oh, sorry, sorry, thank you. Councillor McPherson is voted against. And Councillor, thank you, Councillor Kumar. You abstained. Abstained. So there's 1 abstention and 2 against. Oh, just needed that. Thank you. Right, so we're at 12:30, councillors. I do intend to press on. So I'm sure we'll have some good discussions on these papers, but please make your comments and your questions succinct and relevant. Thank you. So we're moving on to the item number in our agenda, which is on page 28, 7.3, the general RMA delegations. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, general RMA delegations? Mr. Thomas, and thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Oh, thank you. I mean to put the motion. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Thank you, JP.
Madam Chair, I'll be incredibly brief. Take the report as read. We obviously just have changed some of our structure and titles, so our manuals need to be updated. So for the removal of any doubt, we just wanted to re-clarify that the Chief Executive is your employee and will sign off all resource consents or manage or oversight all of those processes related to the RMA. So very much just an administrative double underline that it's the Chief Executive's responsibility.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Councillor Wang?
Just like to signal that I'd like to move the motion, of the recommendation.
Oh, thank you. You want to move it? Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Yes, Mr. Berryman-Kemp?
I do have one question,
Yes,
Madam
certainly.
Chair. Thank you. Oh, look, thank you for that. And not to take up too much time, but can you give me an update of the status of the RMA committee? Because I'm unsure as to what has happened to the former RMA committee, which was made up, and where that sits within this.
Just on that, the RMA committee was formed mainly to focus on the policy elements. If you recall, it was around plan changes. So we will probably be looking into talking through the governance discussion about whether we need to reconvene a RMA policy committee to talk about plan changes going forward. The other function of the RMA committee, which was removed, was when we made the decision to move to independent commissioners. So if you recall, we made some decisions a number of years ago to identify a number of RMA commissioners who, depending on availabilities and skills, would oversee all notified hearings or consent hearings. So again, we'll come back to you probably when we do this manual and talk about the RMA policy committee for next year.
Mike, thank you. Thank you. So I am going to, we've had a mover and a seconder for the recommendation, so I'm going to put that recommendation now. Is there any discussion? Appears to be none, so I'll put that recommendation. That the committee recommends that Council confirms that the Chief Executive can exercise the existing Chief Executive's general delegation in the RMA Delegations Manual where there is no longer, under Council's new management structure, a Council officer holding the position title identified in the manual. It has been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Thank you. The next recommendation. I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report of the Rural Community Board meeting held 16th of August 2021, that be received. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Contrary? Carried. Thank you, Stavros. Oh, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper and and Stavros. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very briefly, obviously this is a report that is being jointly developed between council officers and the chair of the Rural Community Board, and that's why Mrs. Trumper is here with me. I'll have a quick presentation. I'll take the report as read, but we'll go through a quick presentation about the nature of the report, but primarily reminding elected members that this is a continuation of giving effect to a responsible waste management and achieving environmental outcomes for our communities, but also, as importantly, to ensure that we have equitable access to services to all our communities, wherever they are. Well, some time ago, obviously, we have developed a waste management minimization plan for the organization, and subsequent to that, we have gradually given effect to all the components of that. One element that was missing when we extended waste management and recycling collections in the rural communities, there were two communities in the rural areas in Nakuru and Atiumuri and Horokoro that were not included at that point in time in 2018-19. And in 21, those residents were approached through the good leadership of the rural community boards and were consulted again about their feelings and their views to extend these services in their communities. The consultation options basically asked those communities whether they were interested to support the extension of waste collection services and waste management in those areas, or they did not. A good and a significant effort was undertaken where some, as you can see the numbers there, properties situated along sealed roads or unsealed roads were consulted with a total invitation for consultation about 300 properties. We had a good level of responses on the sealed roads and maybe a 50-50 response from areas where the properties with unsealed roads with a more sparsely populated community responded at a 50% rate. The consultation process indicates very clearly a majority support for the extension of the services, or about 63-64% collectively. And our report indicates that on the basis of the majority support, we now wish to proceed, or recommend, and the rural community recommends that it proceeds with the application of the services. The chart in front of you basically is to highlight that we have actually analyzed all the responses on a street-by-street basis to give you confidence that it was not a generic consultation, but rather we have approached everyone in those affected areas to make sure that we have a reasonable feedback and an objective assessment of their views. Again, what is indicated here is that properties who are situated on unsealed roads, and as I said earlier, they are by nature more sparsely populated. They responded and they expressed the view that BACS was not an ideal option for them, and obviously the ability for those properties to deliver, to manage their waste services, and their waste collection services in a drop-off facility, it was explored. But however, it was a concern that if we give them bags to deliver their waste into those collection points, we could potentially create some the possibility of dumping grounds. And I will leave Chair Trumpet later on to maybe outline a bit more in more detail the community board's views about that too. I think generally had an excellent feedback from the community. We believe that waste services is an essential service for rural communities, no matter where they are. And you would recall in a few years back we extended that service into our Lakes community services too, and we have identified options for them, and we'll continue to work with them to improve those kind of services. We think that it will make life easier for the families in those areas, and of course their children and the future generations. It will give us an opportunity to recycle better and apply our waste minimization strategies. It is a convenient and cheaper than and the people option, and residents do not have to travel all the way to the landfill every week. And one side effect, it potentially reduce our littering and dumping on the rural roads. I've got some feedback there. Obviously, the points you've got, there, the blue ones are sort of experts from the feedback we had, and I think that in general you see there is a significant support and positive commentary for this proposal. Some concerns. State Highway is not a safe location for being picked up. We hear that. However, if you look into our rural communities, we do collect wastes from State Highway 30 and other state highways, and obviously there's not a significant consideration, and the collection contractors got appropriate health and safety procedures in place to give effect to these services. Again, some people say my driveway is so long I cannot push the bins. Again, the option for that is that the specific collection points can be agreed, with these people to make sure that make it as convenient as possible. I have a private bin. These services are not for me. Again, as always, it's a balance between what an individual wishes to undertake versus the general community good, and obviously with a majority support of 64%, as an indication the majority of those communities wish to engage into that collection service. We have pigs, chicken, and a private tip. Unfortunately, pigs don't recycle unless you so recycling collection is consistent with the waste minimization strategy. I compost at home. I have no waste. I think that is seems to be a little bit sort of contrary to our waste assessment, which indicates that at least 50% of all the waste we collect from our urban population is material that cannot be composted. And therefore, the question arises, what do you do with the uncompostable material? Again, I am really recycling very well, which is fantastic, and I think it's to be commented. However, we still have about 50% of the waste that is not recyclable and need to be managed in a responsible way. We are already paying very high rates, and we don't need another set of rates on our shoulders. Again, as you see later in the financials considerations, you see that the normalization process we have applied is that the cost of this service is higher than the costs that the rates proposed to be collected from the rural community, and the balance of this cost will be distributed and normalized for the entire community, and obviously there is a direct financial benefit for those properties to engage into the benefits of scale. In summary, we did have an excellent community participation in the consultation with about 74% returns. The majority indicated that they are supportive of the services. We had a consistent response from sealed roads with a majority of 64% supporting the proposal. And of course, residents in unsealed roads, was not as forthcoming or as enthusiastic about the service. However, they present a much smaller number of properties. And our recommendation, and I think the Rural Community Board is in agreement with that, is that the collection of bagged rubbish is not ideal, and wheelie bin service is preferable in terms of expanding the service in that area. And again, as always, we will remain open to negotiate and discuss with an individual property owner any specific needs they may have in the particular locations. These are the financial costs. The expected costs, if we start this service from January 2022, it will be about $64,000 to the end of the financial year, or a total of $128,000 on an annual basis. The rates collection from targeted rates in those properties, about $66,000, will remain, which attracts or creates a balance of about $63,000 to be normalized for all 29,000 district properties. And therefore, by the targeted rate setting in the annual plan for 22-23, we expect that the targeted rate needs to be adjusted by about $2 per targeted rate property to accommodate and enable these kind of services to be given effect for the whole of our districts. Therefore, our recommendations, and I will also leave Ms. Trumpet to express a view about that is that this committee considers the feedback from public consultation and recommends to Council that we commence this extended rural service as from January 2022. Thank you very much. Mrs. Trumpet.
Thank you. I just want to put a little bit of context and background to this. So back in 2016, when we consulted with the community, Ngā Kuru Horohoro were absolutely adamantly opposed to this. And I think they got 29% that actually wanted to join the service. And so the Rural Community Board asked the Council of the day to actually put them to the side and that lets Waikiri come in and extend it through Rotorua Lakes. And that was done, and it meant that the community actually had been listened to. Now, at that time, the board actually spoke with, I'm going to try and think, we had about 7 public meetings. So this has been extensively consulted with the community. And so I also formed a small reference group, and they were made up of those vehemently opposed and absolutely 100% supported. So that reference group was able to bring in all that feedback in, and we got to a point where we said, right, we'll come back at the next LTP to see where you're at. And of course, in the ensuing years, we've had more movement with our rural residential, and we've had people move from town and they're used to a service, and we've had a significant number of subdivisions. But we've also had, and this is something that you're probably not aware of, it's called the cooperative difference with Fonterra and Miraka, Bay of Plenty Regional Council and Waikato Regional Council. Bay of Plenty Regional Council have a no burn policy, no rubbish disposal on land policy. Waikato Regional Council are a little bit more relaxed. That is coming in their waste minimisation. And then we have Fonterra and Miraka with their rubbish to reuse policy and the cooperative difference. Now, that cooperative difference is worth another 7 cents to the supplier, and we have to provide every year, it's only recently been introduced, but we have to supply evidence that we are disposing of our waste appropriately. So this actually now fits in perfectly, and yes, it is household waste, but that is the biggest issue. Yes, you might have pigs, so that will get rid of the food scraps, but it's your plastic waste, and we all know that packaging is, horrendous. So I actually am thrilled to be able to present this recommendation to Council today, because it means it now ties up our entire rural community. And as we work with the infrastructure team and the budgeting team to get more roads sealed, then we will get more roads covered with our waste. So anyway, so that was the reason why our recommendation has come forward now. It's taken a long time to put together. Happy to take questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper, for the work that you've done in this area too with our team. Thank you very much. Yes, Your Worship, I'm going to thank you.
Very quickly, but thank you. And it's nice to see you coming to the table with infrastructure beside you and bringing a recommendation together. I think it's marvellous. The only issue that sort of sits outside, and it might fit more the lakeside communities, is did we ever look at transfer stations, or doesn't it work?
So in answer to that, that was one of the options that we provided to Ngākuru specifically, and Upper Atamuri, and it was a big categorical no.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just signalling I'd be happy to move the recommendation, but I do have a question. So in the feedback, I think one of the, more valid concerns, for want of a better term, would be the safety aspect of the trucks stopping to pick up bins. But I just wonder, Mrs. Trumper, from your experience with rural delivery and school bus services for rural schools, the motorists in the rural area, are they well used to service vehicles stopping and doing so safely?
I can assure you that Smart Environmental have extremely good health and safety requirements of where people place their bins. And as they are collecting from State Highway 5, which is a 100k area, and obviously the rural arterial routes, they are well aware that there's always a tanker or a stock truck or a food truck turning somewhere. So, no, we're well aware.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell, then Mr. Thomas. That's it then. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Shirley, congratulations. Well done. Tremendous. And having it happen so quickly too as well. And being somebody who did oppose these bins for some years ago, I'm on the good side too now. So now I'm happy to, if there's no seconder to support the motion, I'll second the motion, but well done.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I was beaten to seconding the motion. I would have been very happy to do that, but happy that Trevor's doing it. Councillor Maxwell. Look, I just want to congratulate the Rural Community Board and Mrs. Trumper and her work on this. From having worked very closely with Council on the integration of the new services out around the lakes areas, I know for us there was a lot of angst over it, and then now everyone loves the service, and I congratulate Mrs. Trumper on going back to those communities in her rural community that were opposed to start with and giving them the option the second time round to ask for it. It's a great service. I don't think there's never been any issue with the trucks collecting off State Highway 33 or State Highway 30, so I think that it'll be a great extension of services to those communities.
Thank you. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too would like to say congratulations to Mrs. Trumper. Being the councillor on the Rural Community Board, it has been really enlightening to learn about the history about this particular issue. And as we all know, that fly tipping in rural areas is just horrible, and something like this that could really potentially have positive impacts on it. And following on from Mr. Thomas's comments, as we extend furthermore into our lakes and rural regions, that we have quality waste collection and waste disposal methods as well. And hopefully in the future, as we if we do introduce food and organic waste collection, that these will be considered as well. But thank you to Mrs. Trumper and the rest of the Rural Community Board for going out to the public meeting that was held down in Nakuru, and listening to the people there as well of their concerns and their comments on this issue. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We have had a mover and a seconder, so if there are any further discussions before I go to Councillor Donaldson as the mover, perhaps for a last comment. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's been no commentary contrary to the resolution, so I'm happy to leave it there. I think this is a fabulous step forward for our district and tidying up our act, and yep, I think we're all in support. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll put that recommendation that the the recommendation of the Rural Community Board meeting held on the 16th of August 2021 be adopted, and that is the extension of the curbside waste collection to Ngākuru, Horohoro and Upper Atiamuri. That the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee recommends to Council to agree to the extension of curbside waste collection to Ngākuru, Horohoro and Upper Atiamuri, and the services to commence in early 2022. It has been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you. Councillors and Your Worship, before we go into public excluded, which is our next agenda item, I am going to make some remarks to our resigning committee member, Eugene Berryman-Kemp. And I do that because I know that there are people who are watching this live stream, Eugene, who have valued your contribution as a Te Tātou Aotearoa member. And so I'd like them to hear particularly some words of appreciation from me as the chair, but I am going to give others perhaps an opportunity, one or two, to say some words. So I want to thank you very much, Eugene, for your contribution. And you've represented Te Tātou Aotearoa very, very well indeed. You've never left us in any doubt as to the issues and the concerns that you've raised on their behalf. So I do thank you for that. But I also want to thank you for the wider knowledge that you have shared with us. You work at a certain level, and you have given us the opportunity to gain from that as well. So that there's been that transfer of your knowledge to us, and we're very, very grateful for that. I know at times, we have discussed many issues, and you've been very clear about what the view of Te Tātou is. But it is also in the wider aspects of your work that you've been prepared to share with us that we've been able to gain good knowledge from as well. So I do thank you for that. We appreciate that you're a busy person and that opportunities come from time to time, and I guess we'd really like to know what those opportunities are that you're taking up. But can I, on behalf of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee, thank you so much for your contribution to our committee as a member of Te Tātou. Thank you very much. I am going to ask if there are one or two councillors that might like to say something as well. Yes, Your Worship.
And we also thanked and acknowledged you at the Te Arawa River Iwi Trust meeting that we had this week. But I'd like to personally congratulate you for a wonderful appointment at the Ministry for the Environment. And to know there's a Te Arawa lens going to be there is going to be very helpful when we go into the discussions about the future of the RMA, Te Mana o Te Wai, the Three Waters, and their links with other government agencies. I know your sound head for strategy and policy is going to serve our wider rohi and Te Arawa really well. We won't abuse the privilege of the relationship, but these are the huge issues facing the country, and knowing you're there with a hands-on understanding of a genuine partnership through Te Tātou Aotearoa, and you're working with the Te Arawa River Iwi Trust is a huge experience that you take to Wellington. We wish you well.
Thank you. Oh, yes, certainly.
Ai koutou, no reira ai, he mihi nui atu nei tēnei wā, ki te tautoko I tēnei komiti nei. Yes, Koto, look, thank you. Somewhat overwhelming, actually, but look, just to update you, yes, what's interesting when I looked back, I came onto strategy, policy and finance in 2016, and hasn't the world changed since then? But look, really what I just wanted to say is that I have thoroughly enjoyed and found really rewarding the opportunity to be part of the strategic thought leadership for the community that we are all a part of. Really mindful of my role in terms of representing the thoughts of Te Arawa through Te Tātou, or Te Arawa in particular, but also, of course, our role in this wider community as well. So certainly I'll take that with me. Just so that I can fill in all of the committee, actually, I am leaving Te Arawa River Iwi Trust, around CE, and I'm about to take up a role on the 1st of November as Director Te Manawa Te Wai at the Ministry for Environment. So I'll be overlooking the national rollout of Te Manawa Te Wai within the RMA reforms. So certainly, as you know, wai is a topic that is close to my heart. Take the role of being an active kaitiaki really seriously, and whilst I enjoy the opportunity to do that for my iwi, I must say the opportunity to extend that and perhaps make a bit more of a difference on a national stage was something that I was quite keen on. Part of that role will involve working with communities, iwi and local government authorities. So obviously moving forward, it's untenable for me to retain a place on this committee, which is the main reason why I'm planning to step down. However, just to update you, Te Tātou o Te Arawa has nominated Dr. Kepa Morgan as my replacement, effective from November 1. So that recommendation will be coming through the council process, which means I will still be there at the representation review hearings next week. But I just wanted to just fill you in on that. And I guess that it is that thing. My sincere thanks, obviously, to be a part of the Te Arawa and Council partnership right from the signing in 2015 has been a key thing to lay a foundation for the future as well. So, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eugene. So now, may I have a mover and a seconder, please, that we go into public excluded? And the reasons, thank you, Councillor Yates, thank you, Mrs. Trumper. And the reasons for that are to retain our commercial sensitivity and due to an obligation of confidence at this point in time. So thank you very much. It's been moved and seconded that the council move into public excluded. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you.